Good morning. We are, I don't know what the term is. Reconvening. Yes, reconvening. The Special Corporate Administrative Services Committee meeting of Round 2 budgets. We have an amended agenda, and I'd like to add another item. So amend it once more. After 37, we're going to put in an in-camera session. After 37. So once we've finished all the budget items, we're going to go back in camera for a conversation. All right. Any other changes? Tina?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There are just a few housekeeping items that I wanted to clarify at the end of the meeting as well regarding a couple of the functions. And even there is potentially a suggestion to revisit the joint use function because we only have taxation for the deficit. We have nothing for next year, so we should probably talk about that.
Okay, so what would you like us to add in for that?
Joint use.
Joint use?
Yeah.
Anything else? Yes, that would be number 38. Would be joint use. Anything else? You still looking? That's good. Okay, so we've added in. Yes, Lori?
Just from the legislative side, it's the same in camera in accordance with the community charter as we had yesterday? Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I checked with Tara and she said it would be the same. Okay. All right, any other questions, comments? So we have an amended agenda. Look for a motion to adopt. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Thank you. So we're going to continue on from yesterday. We did not do number 6. We're going to do number 6. That's the library at 1:30 when we reconvene this afternoon. So we're going to be starting on number 23, Annex V, with regards to community recreation services. Facilities, sorry. Yeah, community recreation facilities. Sorry, I was trying to move things and read at the same time. All right. So there were two budget proposals that were incorporated in round 1. And now we have 2 budget proposals that are before us at this point. And these are these came out of our last infrastructure meeting. Director Theis.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Wondering who is going to do the life cycle analysis? Is that our asset management staff? Is that our recreation staff? Is that or is that a consultant?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. That work would be contracted out to a specialist asset consultant. And that's in part due to the specialized nature of the work and also related to the capacity of the organization. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? We could do 1 or 2 or 1 and 2. Director McMahon.
Just given the monumental budget we're looking at, I'm wondering if the sound baffles could be put off a year.
Staff?
Because of the wires that are degraded from when to pool salt water, it would be staff's recommendation not to wait for that particular project due to a safety and liability issue.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. From staff's perspective, of the 3 non-critical capital assets, the acoustic baffles are the one that has the biggest impact on programming in the facility and on user experience. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Talk. Sorry, Director Talk.
That's okay. The Aquatic Center sound baffles, do staff suppose that they'd be able to get that work done during the annual shutdown, or would an additional shutdown be required?
We would be attempting to do it during the shutdown, but until it went out to an RFP, we wouldn't be able to determine the exact dates and how long the nature of that project will take until we get the feedback back from the contractor.
Thank you. Any other questions by directors? Director Ties.
While we're on sound baffles, the baffles themselves, are they still in decent shape, and could we hang them in the Roberts Creek Hall?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Decent shape, yes. The majority, as noted in the budget proposal, the majority of the cost here is attached to the labor and to the hangars themselves. So replacing baffles would for the pool would enhance the performance of the baffles in the pool, important for their purpose there and managing sound load. And in terms of disposal of the asset, SERD usually works through our asset disposal process and looks for ways to not send assets that may have even a portion of serviceable life left, make them available for reuse. And so, excellent suggestion, and staff would consider that as part of finding a home that's not in the landfill.
We'll fight you for them. We do Seaside. Director McMahon.
That's what I was going to say. We have no lack of facilities with terrible acoustics. So I'm sure we can find a place.
And staff would note that there are an awful lot of very large baffles in the Seashelt Aquatic Center that could probably be shared amongst a number of community facilities, noting that they're labor intensive to install.
Awesome. All right. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Tina?
I also just wanted to comment, part of the report that was presented at Committee 2 is just to highlight that for the community recreation facilities, the $750,000 that we're funding is really for critical assets, and this is why we're still in a case of bringing forward budget proposals, because things like the fitness replacement, the sound baffles, those are things that we're still not fully funding the needs of those four facilities.
So how would you like to proceed? Director Hiltz.
Pardon me. I'll move option 1. And as a block.
So that both items be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget? Are there 3 items?
Oui.
I think it's number 3 and number 4, is it not? There are 2 items in here? 2 have already been approved?
3 and 4, yes.
Right. Okay, is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. Any other questions, comments? Director Hiltz?
Just a quick, I'm going to come back to the baffles. These are original, during the original construction, so that was, what was the lifespan of these sound baffles that were installed, and will the new ones, are they expected to last longer than the original ones? Because salt water and chlorine and things have changed. So what's the expected lifespan of the new ones compared to the old ones? Or is that an easy to understand?
For baffles is often dependent on the environment in which they're housed. As you know, the Seashell pool is saltwater for approximately the first 3 years, which is harder on those sorts of material. In addition, there was no UV protection on the windows of the Seashell Aquatic Center when it was first constructed, which was later added. Lifespan for baffles, I would believe, typically would be probably 10 to 15 years normally in that sort of an environment. That's my best guess.
So, in hindsight, the UV coverings on the windows were could have been included in the original build, I guess, looking backwards.
Yes, it could have been included in the original build, however, it was not.
Right. And so in terms of corrosion aspects, are there other corrosion aspects that will be coming forward in the future?
There has been a lot of work in the past due to corrosion issues with the facility. Staff believe at this point that we have a pretty good handle on it. Other than the hangars and the lights, it's true that the lifespan of the facility will be shortened based on having the saltwater system in there for the first few years. But everything that staff can do is being done to maximize the lifespan of that building.
Any other questions, comments? So we have a recommendation on the floor for both budget items. All those in favor? Thank you. We'll move on to 20. Now we're going to look at 24, 25, 26, and 27. They're all to do with parks. 24, 25, 26 are background information. 27 actually has the budget items in it. Right, so we're starting on Annex W, pages 127 to 142. This is with regards to Sunshine Coaster Trail Phase 2. This is wrong. Sun Coaster Trail. The agenda says wrong, sorry. Sun Coaster Trail. And would you like to speak to this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So staff have reworked this initiative since round one based on two things. Firstly, a deeper dive into grant criteria and realizing there's more work to do to prepare for solid applications, including securing land tenure. And secondly, an appreciation of the volume of work associated with the 2020 budget, and that's demanded in the Park Service by asset management needs. And so an approach is now recommended that seeks to build a sustainable trail stewardship capacity on the coast. And this takes into account that many sections of the proposed Suncoaster route already exist on the ground and were created by trail groups that could be supported to keep up or even enhance the trail, leveraging grants, etc. And so instead of proceeding into a construction phase, $15,000 is proposed to support a partnership development approach with the Sunshine Coast Trail Society or with society members. And as well, as noted in this report, in terms of defining a route that can be worked on through a partnership development approach, 2 updates are offered from staff's last report on this project relating to gaps that need more work. And this is on page 130. So one is at the Langdale Ferry end of the route. Staff suggests creating a trailhead at the Gibsons and Area Community Centre to enable planning forward, while work on an active transportation link from the ferry to Gibsons continues. And the other is through the Sechelt Indian Government District area. The work of the foundation agreement is currently taking precedence, and so an interim route, or what staff refer to as a dotted line, on Highway 101 is recommended for the time being. And it's recognized that these solutions are compromises. As work on the trail and other projects moves forward, staff will seek to drive improvements to routing that offer greater safety and amenity in these 2 areas. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in first with a question. On page 129, right above where it says discussion, it says almost all of the trail concept design route is located on public lands. So basically saying point 3 is not. When you're talking public, are you talking Sechelt Nation as well? Or is point 3 that piece that we need to deal with?
Thank you, Chair. The point 3 is Islands Timberlands, and the 60.7 is a combination of Hydro, Ministry of Transportation, and Flynn-Rord administered provincial lands, as well as roadways in municipal areas.
Okay, thank you. So you have a lot of partnership stuff to sort out with all of that as well. Okay. Any other questions? Director McMahon.
I think the trailhead at the rec center makes a lot of sense for right now. I think that's a good choice. The map doesn't yet show it, but I'm sure it will. I was wondering a couple things. One is that will the route be impacted by BC Timber Sales logging plans? And the other one is, might this open any additional grant funding opportunities for improvements to the shoulder of Reed Road?
Thank you, Chair. On the first question about BC Timber Sales, certainly there is always the possibility of implications from timber harvest on recreational activities. One of the first steps that's noted in the report is proceeding with work around land tenure, and through authorizations under the Forest and Range Practices Act, there either a requirement to consult or even a requirement to protect recreational assets could be realized. At the current time, staff have a good dialogue with BC Timber Sales, as does the Trail Society, which holds Section 57 authorizations for some of the trails that are included in the route that is proposed. And through that dialogue, strategies to mitigate the impact of timber harvest on trails occurs. Obviously, an area where there's lots of opportunity. And in terms of grants, the more community support that can be generated, letters of support, partnerships that can be noted in grant applications, the stronger applications generally are. And certainly there are grant programs that could be looked at for development of active transportation routes around Reed Road. The tenure, including like SCRD's tenure on that land, and even the Ministry of Transportation's tenure, are some of the issues that make easy progress difficult, but staff are aware of the community's interest and the need for links in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to further questions, I just want to mention Tofino and Ucluelet have taken advantage of ICE-T funding, right? So I know Chair Pratt and I have been over there and at ICE-T and seen the funding that they've accessed. So it'd be a good model to look at. I've got Director Ties, and then Director Pratt.
All right. Yeah, so the $1 million estimated cost for completing it. I guess right now we're sort of in the if we build it, they will come mode. So I'm just wondering if we've been in contact with Sunshine Coast Tourism and Scredo to see how the next steps of marketing this and turning this into a tourism destination will be proceeding, and I think that dialogue should be had sooner rather than later to see whether there's some interest in doing that, because I think that's where the huge benefit will be.
Director Pratt?
Just a question. Would this be a project that we could apply gas tax funding to? Or even portions of the project?
Yeah. Director McMahon?
Yeah. Do we have a maintenance budget for Phase 1 of the Sun Coaster?
The maintenance budget, thank you through the chair. The maintenance budget for Phase 1 is, it's covered through regular parks operations budget, albeit admittedly minimal per year. Most staff resources are focused on preparation for the annual BC bike race and getting things cleaned up before that event.
CAO McKinley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say staff has had some preliminary discussions with Lynn Robert at Coastal Economic Trust, and Lynn actually reached out to me before I even arrived, and we planned to meet to talk about some funding opportunities. I worked with Lynn a lot when I was working as the Economic Development Director at Northern Development Initiative Trust. So it's on our radar. We're going to be looking to tap into ICE-T funding whenever and wherever possible.
All right, any other, Director McMahon?
Sorry, this is just a process question. So are we discussing all these items first and then going to the voting part, or how are we doing this?
If we pass this motion here, then we've actually taken care of it in number 27? So we can't do it here, or we could do it here. Okay.
I
So-
believe the budget proposal is on page 166.
Okay, let's go
But
there.
there's one ahead of it on page 165, so there's just,
Why don't we, let's just work through the recommendations as they've got them in here, and then when we get to 27, we can pass whatever we need to. Does that work? Okay, so there's a recommendation for this one on page 127. You'll move that? Okay. Is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. All right, let's move on to Annex X, pages 143 to 150. And this is with regards to sports fields. And did you want to speak to this one as well?
Thank you, Chair. Briefly, staff have continued to work with the Better Fields Committee and with other field user groups and local governments on the coast. And this report shares an update on the work of the last 60 days and recommends some next steps on page 146 and 147 to improve the condition, use, and community benefit of all fields on the coast. There remains some prioritization work to do before staff can recommend reconstruction or a specific approach to reconstruction of Shirley Macy Park fields, although it is acknowledged that the field's drainage system is not performing adequately. All of the steps recommended in this report can be accomplished within existing administrative mandate and base budgets, so there's no specific directive or direction requested here. And as an additional share, through the conversation with field user groups, the purchase of an aerator and the approval and incorporation of that at round one was confirmed by recent dialogue as a critical asset to improve fields on the coast, as was work underway on establishing irrigation strategies that can be used during a drought. And that project is underway right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
I just wanted to say that thank you so much for having that joint field users group. I've heard a lot of really positive comments coming from the community, from people that attended it and people that heard about how well it went. So thank you so much for really taking the lead on that and working with the other governments and the user groups. A lot of really positive feedback.
Director McMahon.
yeah, I want to say nice things too. The goal here is a seamless experience for users because they don't care who owns the fields. And this is a giant step in the right direction. I don't know if anybody has done a full analysis. Maybe it's something to throw at Scredo. But a lot of people travel to the coast for games, and it has an impact. I know that different groups have said, we bring in so many people, but I don't think anyone has ever looked at it as a system because we haven't been looking at it as a system. So it would be just an interesting exercise to find out what the economic impact of these kind of activities is.
And I'll just say I'm happy that you're looking at the irrigation piece too, because it's a cost to do the work on these fields, but then if we don't maintain them, that's a waste too, right? So the two go hand in hand, and we need to make sure that we water and do what we need to do for the fields. And prioritizing as you're doing makes sense, because then you're not watering all the fields if they're not actually going to be used, right? So it's very good. Any other questions, comments? So there's a recommendation on page 143. Would someone like to make that recommendation? Moved? Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. So we'll move to item 26, Annex Y, pages 151 to 162. Park Service Overview received for information, so we received this already. Any questions about the report? Director McMahon?
Okay, there was a count on the number of parks we have somewhere. 108 community parks. Does that include some of the completely ridiculous ones that have no access and are sitting down at the bottom of a ravine?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, actually, the 108 count includes the properties that you're referring to, ghost properties, if you will.
Yeah, the park that nobody can get to, can't use, but it's a park. All right. Director Hills.
Yeah, I'm going to pursue the 108. Are these included on the GIS, like when you go into the parks portal? Are all of those 108 listed there? And so how do you identify the unnamed, the ghost ones? Is it got a number or a name, or how do you identify it other than say that one at the bottom of the hill?
Thank you, Chair. So essentially the process that happens once an agreement's signed, like a right-of-way permit through the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, that gets entered into our administration system. Parks works with the ITGIS department, and the spatial information for mapping gets entered within that system. So whether it's the public or internal staff that are using our GIS application software, they can pull up the parks layer. And yes, if there's a 10-year permit signed for the property, it will be included within that parks layer.
So the follow-up, if the public was to inquiry about one of these ghost ones, what would be the best way for them to identify that to staff? So that everyone's talking about the same parcel of land. Is there, particularly the ghost ones?
Thank you, Chair. Typically, when it's a resident that has an issue or a question or concern, most commonly referred to nomenclature is kind of the road name. So people know that they live on this road. More than likely, we can identify that on the map and locate the nearest right-of-way access, for example.
Director McMahon?
Do we have a policy around accepting parks dedications from developers? I know a number of these ghost parks are historical, but I can think of one right now that's quite recent. And it says right in the report, the parkland should be suitable for active recreation and not include hazard lands, which is exactly the one that I'm thinking about right now. So do we have a policy? Do we need a policy, or is this outside our control?
Thank you for the question, Chair. There are various things written down and that loosely come together as a policy. SCRD does not have a specific park quality standard set in policy, but we do have standards that are defined in certain documents. We look to our official community plans, the Parks and Rec Master Plan, etc. And staff are careful at the time when land dedication is discussed to assess lands for hazards of any kind, invasive species, etc., contribution to community amenity, and the regional district isn't under an obligation to accept any particular lands. So there's a high degree of diligence applied before land is accepted. Thank you.
Follow up to that question. If we don't want to take land, can they do a financial contribution instead? Do we have a place to put those kinds of funds?
Thank you, Chair. Not only can we, the developer must. And yes, there is a parkland acquisition fund into which those contributions are placed. Thanks. And those. and that funding can only be used for that purpose according to the Local Government Act.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to jump in with a question here. On page 153, under Human Resources, so we've got this huge list of assets that our Parks Department takes care of. Under Human Resources, it says we have 11.28 full-time equivalent employees. Some are seasonal, some, come only in the summer. But then if we go to page 157, there's a table. So I guess my question is, some of these are managers, etc. How many of these people actually work in the field or on the maintenance repair of the parks? Because this is basically 11.28, but not all of them are actually in the field. So how many staff do we actually have maintaining this huge list of assets?
Thank you, Chair. Our operations crew is about 6, and the table on 157 shows that at any given time, only a portion of the time of those 6 people is allocated to parks, because those same people might be doing work in the cemetery or might be doing work at Dakota Ridge. Thank you.
So I think it's important to point out that this really just highlights the need for more service level standards and asset management planning to have a more fulsome. This is probably one of many reports and one of the more comprehensive reports. I have to give kudos to staff for putting something like this together, because there really is a lot of missing pieces. And so this is part of what we're discussing, is how can we incrementally do this, because of course from asset management planning we have more work to do. But most certainly staff are doing a good job trying to define these service levels, to have the kind of discussions based on the questions that you're asking. So whether it's policy decisions on how we accept, what is our strategy on parks, do we keep all of these parks, what is the appropriate service standard, and how many staff do we need to deliver. So these are really good questions you're asking, and this is what staff's trying to create. It won't be in the next 1, maybe 2 years. We'll work towards it, but this is the questions you're asking is what we hope to be able to staff hope to provide for the committee.
And this ties back into the question that Director McMahon keeps asking. There are additional things that we need to do, that the community wants us to do, but where do we actually cut? And it's only when we're looking at the staffing, the service levels, and the assets that we're looking to maintain, that we can actually make those kinds of decisions. So this report is a great foundation. I've never seen this information put together in one place before, so it's taken a lot of work. Thank you for bringing that forward. Director McMahon.
And I look forward to future discussions. And talking of cutting, leaf blowers could be one of those. I have a thing about leaf blowers. I was hiking one of the rustic trails in Soames Hill Park, and it had been leaf blown, and I really don't think that's necessary. So, just saying.
Thank you. Any other questions about this report? Director Hiltz.
I just wanted to comment about, I walk some of those trails as well, and I've wondered about that as well. And I think it might be actually groups who are running running races through there who might be doing it on their own. It might not actually be, there might be voluntary contributions to the service level that are undocumented.
All right, any other questions on this report? All right, we'll move forward to item 27, Annex Z. This is where we're going to see a number of budget requests, pages 163 through 168. First of all, any questions about the budget requests? I'll give you a few minutes to look through those. Director Ties?
For the first one, I just want to comment that it makes sense to have a capital budget for maintenance of existing infrastructure. I think it's a waste of time to bring these things to the board every time, and I'm sure staff is more than capable of administering a capital budget to prioritize some of those things.
you. Any questions about any of the others? Director Ties?
Actually, never mind. That question was answered about 10 minutes ago.
3? We have 3, 2? Well, one has been taken out, right? Yes, and we've already done that. Okay, so we have 2 budget requests in here. Page numbers? Okay, page number. First one's on page 164 and 166. First one is 100,000 and the other is the 15,000 amended Suncoaster. We'll pass them both here again. Director Ties?
All right, I'll go for option 1, that the following budget proposal be, both following budget proposals be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget.
Seconded. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, staff. Annex AA. We're getting up to your GG. Yes, we've gone through the alphabet.
to finish with HH last night.
All right, good. All right, so we're looking at item 28, Annex AA, pages 169 through 171. This is on public transit. First of all, any questions on the report? I think this as well came out of our last meeting. Would someone like to, first of all, questions? If there's no questions, somebody can just move the recommendation. Moved. Would you like to speak to that?
Just briefly, I'm just excited to see this go through, so I'd like to put that the following budget proposal be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget.
And is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other questions, comments? Director Toth?
I just want to commend staff on turning that one around so quickly. Yeah, thank you.
All right, anything else? Director?
I'm really hopeful that this gives us a lot of the data that we're looking for too, so or at least a start of that. So, and once again, thank you.
All right, all those in favor? Thank you. Number 29, Annex BB, pages 172 to 173, regional feasibility. Now, this did come before us at round 1 budget, and it was approved. All we're doing here is moving to a new function, moving to a feasibility function, and taking it from user rate to taxation. So we're not changing the amount, just changing where the function it's coming under and how the funds will be actually allocated, or where they'll be allocated from. So any questions on this one? Sorry, Director Hiltz?
I'm testing my memory here. So I thought there was a feasibility reserves in which it was going to be drawn. I can't remember. Was there?
Tina?
Yeah, that's articulated in the 2020 funding. So there's 8135 from past feasibility from many years ago that sits
Okay.
unallocated. So the actual project will be 30,000, but 8135 will come from this other source of funding.
Thank you. It's right in front of me, but I appreciate the pointing in the direction.
All right, any other questions, comments? So I'll look for a recommendation. Director Hiltz?
Microphone. Yes, that the following budget proposal be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget. That's option 1.
And a seconder? Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. Item 30, Annex CC, pages 174 to 178, Regional Solid Waste. And there are 2 recommendations in here that were not approved in round 1 budget. One was with regards to the food waste drop-off, because we had to make a decision as to what the process was going to be, and the other one was with regards to the drywall screening process. So both of those came up at infrastructure. Any further questions of staff? No questions. They did a good job at the committee. It's awesome. Director Tighe.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for I think we're considering the size of our budget. This is the cheapest option we've come up with. So this is I'm happy that's going forward right now, and I think what we can evaluate as time goes on. And I guess the drywall screening process improvements is also necessary. So I'll move option 1 for both of these. That the following budget proposal be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget, and that's for both of them.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Then we're going to move to our new item that got added. So this is with regards to regional solid waste, and I think we're going to turn over to the director. This is the addition, pages 178A through D.
Thank you. I wasn't sure if you wanted to give me. Since 2 weeks, we have some unstable. We identified that there is some locations on the public drop-off area at the Sechelt landfill where the ground is turned to be less stable than we would like it to be. And since last Friday, we therefore closed the drop-off area and landfill entirely. We opened it this morning at 8:30 again. There was a long lineup of cars. It's currently open in a limited area, and we're not accepting all materials at this point in time. And this budget proposal is really to further assess actually the cause and the extent of the current situation we have, and develop and implement a short-term operation plan, which would allow us to accept all the materials that we used to accept, as well as to do an assessment on what can we do to improve the stability of the ground in some areas, or what can we do to have a long-term operation plan in place so that we can have the landfill operating and the drop-off area operating for the rest of the life of the landfill. Given the request is currently for $200,000. Thank you. That's it for now.
So what I read in the report you put forward is you don't know if the $200,000 is going to be sufficient at this point. So, once more work is done, you may need to come back to us and request additional funds from somewhere.
Yes, that's correct. This will at least provide us with enough to cover any additional expenditures we're currently having to run the contract, because we're having additional staff on site and additional contracted services retained. And we try to minimize that as much as possible, but it's the balance between providing service level and having to close the landfill at all. Thank you.
All right, any questions? Oh, Tina, go ahead.
Yes, and of course, staff will keep you apprised of as far as any costs associated with any remediation for some of this. And of course, because the funds have to come through taxation, any funds that would not be used, we'd have a discussion if that was the case on what we would do with that, whether or not we put it in reserves or allocate it to something else.
All right. Any questions or comments? Director Lee.
I was just trying to understand, when we built the landfill, did we borrow money to build it? And then how did we get that back? Is that through taxation, or was that through user fees? So in fact, I was asking whether we should be borrowing money to do this and then get it back through an increased user fee as opposed to direct taxation.
So in order for us to do that, we don't know what the repairs are going to be, so we don't know whether or not they qualify for capital. If you're having to put something in the ground that's not really structural, it's not really capital. You're doing ground work, so we would have to look into that. I'm not going to advise it because I think that the type of work, whether it's the engineering, et cetera, is operational in nature. So at this point, because we can't borrow for operations, we're in a situation. Now, historically, how do we fund this? I don't know that off the top of my head.
Okay, other questions? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, I'm just I'm wondering about the timing. So right now, the best information is the site is safe and you can run a safe operation, and then there will be the remediation, which will happen in the future. And I'm wondering, the budget process and when the remediation could happen in terms of timing. And I'm thinking of the emergency. Is this a continuing emergency, or is it's a manageable state, I guess?
Thank you for that question. As I indicated, the site is currently open, and we're not accepting all materials because we don't have the space available for it. So I would not say that we're in a stable situation yet in terms of where we are at. So that's why further work will be required in the upcoming weeks to see where we can improve our service level and at the same time work on a remediation plan. And I think it's beneficial for landfill operations as well as for the community if we can expand our site as soon as possible, also just from a traffic control point of view, because it's getting dicey out there this morning.
Yeah.
And I think if I can interpret some of the question is whether or not staff need prior approval to budget adoption. And I would actually suggest we do that. Because otherwise, theoretically, we don't have approval to expend the funds until we have that. Now, I think that, we're still evaluating the situation, but we most certainly could bring this recommendation forward to this Thursday's board meeting, just this particular one for adoption.
Director McMahon? Sorry, I'm just taking notes.
Well, I would certainly view this as a mandatory budget item, so I'm happy to move the budget item on page 178A to be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget, and further that the motion be forwarded to the board meeting of February 13th.
All right, just one note on this page 178A. It's got number 5 as the budget proposal. It's actually budget proposal 10, just for your records. So when you show, okay, that's what Tara was passing me notes on after school, during school, whatever. Okay, so we have a recommendation on the floor. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you for bringing that forward. All right, so we're moving on to, we'll do 2 more items before we break or take a break, because there's 2 more for the staff that are in front of us, and then we'll be able to move on. So item 32. Yes, item 32, sorry, I have to make sure I'm in the right place. Annex DD 179 through 181. This is with regards to refuse collection. All right. Any questions first on the information that's brought forward? Director McMahon?
The app for curbside collection services, I believe that Seashalt has one. Is that not the case?
I
was
have it
just
on
wondering.
my husband's phone too. It's awesome.
I was just wondering what the uptake had been in Seashalt. I mean, since you've pioneered it.
I mean, just more and more and more, and we're adding more things. So now people can do things like take pictures of potholes and send them in with, with GPS locations, things like that. So whatever. There is more an uptake all the time. 350 right now? Yeah. Yeah. Still early. Director Pratt.
Pictures of potholes, your phone memory must be full. I'm happy to see this education piece from both of that, and I would be happy to move that the following 2 budget proposals be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Move on to item 33. This is with regards to SCRD corporate recycling, and this is a new item. So I'm going to turn over to staff for this one. Sorry, this is Annex EE, pages 182 through 184.
Thank you, Chair. The budget proposal you have in front of you is for an SCRD corporate recycling program for the majority of our major facilities, as outlined on page 182. The budget request is for $33,900 for 2020, and that's to cover the costs of purchasing infrastructure, i.e. bins, for these facilities, as well as to cover 3 months' worth of service. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to question the 3 months of service. So you're thinking it'd only get an operation in September?
That's correct.
That's a long turnaround to get that in place. What are you going to do with all the stuff in the meantime?
Thank you for the question. We currently don't have a recycling program in place at all at our facilities. And the reason why we're proposing to implement this early in Q4 is really because we don't have the staff capacity at the moment, given the implementation of the curbside organics program, to also launch this internal program at the same time.
Director McMahon?
I'm just sort of fascinated with this. So, as I understand it, thanks to laws and regulations, we can't do our own recycling. I mean, that's just dead fascinating. So, and it's completely ridiculous. However, we need to do recycling, so we've got to do it any way we can. But wow, what a crazy situation to be in.
Okay.
And just so we understand, there have been a change in the environment, and so we used to do some things internally, but this would be a more robust program, which would include some different components that we didn't include before. And just a change of the business landscape on the coast, we had to change our business practices. So we've been trying to do as best we can interim, but we're trying to do something corporately and a little more holistically. So this has been long overdue, and we're happy to see it here.
Director Tice?
So where's the recycling going then?
I know. I was wondering, whose office are you guys talking in it now?
So there is a commercial recycler on the coast, and so this would allow, these pumps would allow to connect with them to have all the material go to them.
Right, I think the question was, though, given we don't have it right now, where is all the stuff being stored or put?
Some staff pack it out. We also have a lot of staff doing volunteerism. So we're trying to do the best we can. I'd have to lean to Ian on what they do at the recreation centers, but there's multiple things going on, so we make sure that we do not put as much in the garbage as we can.
Thank you. Director Hills.
So I'm assuming that the regional district as a corporation is not unique in this. So will this kind of become a bit of a model that could be kind of pushed out to other corporations? Is this what, do it for ourselves, but will it become a model that could be adapted to other, like even small business? And I'm wondering if there's any, economies of scale in this. It'll take time to roll out, but has this been contemplated as an example for the general public corporations to follow as well?
In terms of the infrastructure that would be purchased and signage, et cetera, definitely that could be used as a model, as well as offering up the signage that's created to the business sector if they would like to incorporate it into their businesses. But we are aware that there are many businesses all along the coast that are already recycling and are already collecting food scraps, et cetera, for composting.
So this wouldn't necessarily make the SCRD a leader in corporate recycling on the Sunshine Coast. We wouldn't be quite getting that far then.
I think we would be, it's an opportunity to be in line with expectations around what we can collect and what we should be collecting at our facilities. And this would be a program that would be sort of what's called front of house and back of house, so in our public facing areas as well as in our staffing areas.
So are we a leader? I would say probably not. Other municipalities on the coast have already been doing this. It just, when the change happened, it depended on who was providing the service at the time, whether or not there was a disruption in service for the various facilities. And others were using other services, and so there was no disruption. Regional district there was, and so now they need to put something else in place. Director Lee.
I just, somehow it doesn't quite seem right because we subsidize the recycling already, because it doesn't pay for itself with what we go there, and yet we're not allowed to recycle our own stuff when we're paying for others to be recycled. It's kind of boggles the mind.
Any other questions or comments? We're not going there. Director McMahon.
I'm willing to move option 1 on whichever page we're on here.
Page 183.
183, thank you.
Yes. Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. All right, that takes us to the end of the refuse and recycling, etc. So I think we're going to take a bit of a break here right now, and we'll come back 5 or so minutes. All right. We're going to move forward with item 34, Annex FF, Church Road Budget Proposal. And do staff want to speak to this one? At all?
Thank you very much. This report is includes some options on for the funding of the Church Road well development. It describes the benefits and the downsides of applying for a grant we might be able to apply for. And board direction is sought to whether or not to apply for that grant, given that it would most likely delay the construction of the well field the commissioning of the well fields from 2021 to 2022. At the same time, this report includes an option, includes a recommendation to start a loan authorization process. Thank you. Staff are more than happy and able to answer any questions you might have on detail.
Director McMahon.
I can just say that my constituents are telling me that we need water and we need water now. So I think I go with staff recommendation. We should go ahead with this ASAP.
Director Ties.
The only question I have is there was a bit of a debate whether we should do an AAP or a referendum. And, in order to save staff some time, I think maybe the AAP would be the best way to proceed. But I just thought I'd bring this up right now, and if anybody feels strongly about it, then maybe speak up now. But otherwise, I'd be happy to move those recommendations.
Question about the grant piece. I know it says that we can't start the work. Can we start the work and apply for a grant for whatever's left? Or once we've started the project, because it's a project, that none of it would qualify?
As far as we understood from the grant funders, it is the commitment itself. So we cannot sign any contract related to the construction of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I'm with Director McMahon. Anybody else around the table? We've got Director Pratt, Director Lee.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear we need to get this moving. I'd prefer to do it with grant money, but it's we've heard pretty clearly, and we all know we need more water in the system. So, and the AAP process, I think, is far more efficient in this case rather than a referendum.
Director Lee.
I don't quite know enough about the project, but my thoughts were, could we break a chunk of it off and ask for a grant and start it later, like making the pipe bigger, for instance, and maybe get $1 million or so that way?
I think what staff were intending was that the pipe work actually go forward before some of the other stuff because of the work that's happening in Gibson's, because there's some synergies around that. They're going to be ripping up the road to do their piece, so then we'd be putting piping, etc., in before the well is actually commissioned. Follow up?
So, yeah, so in fact, we couldn't get a grant because we need to start work on that right away because of the other one as well. So we can't delay them both.
Staff?
Thank you. Yeah, if this project would be delayed, the opportunity to achieve overall cost saving would be foregone.
Yeah, I don't think we should risk anything that would delay it. If it's not clear cut, then we just go with this.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks. So, yeah, I'm supportive of it. And option one is the fastest way, and the AAP, I don't think that this is a divisive topic. So I think the AAP is appropriate.
Thank you. Okay. Let's do the motion, and I want to come back to one of the comments that's made in the report after. Director McMahon, you wanted to move something?
Sure. I will move staff's recommendations on page 185.
Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. All right, I want to come back to a comment that staff put in here on page 188, last paragraph. So it talks about provincial staff indicated having water meters installed or scheduled in the entire water system and an associated program in place or under development is considered a best practice for all community water supply systems. They also indicated that not having these in place could negatively impact the SCRD's application review score. So that's important information for the community going forward. All right, any other questions, comments on this? I want to commend staff for how quickly they've been moving this forward. I know some people in the community are saying, you know, it's taking time, but we know that there's a process. And you've been pushing it all along the way. So thank you for that. Thank you for bringing this forward, and thank you for your recommendations. Director Hiltz.
Thanks. I'd like to follow up on that sentence that a full metering program, that phase 3 is only one portion of the full metering program. And just to verify that that's staff's understanding, so just to make sure that water meterings isn't the program. Is that?
Staff?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's having meters in place is indeed the basic for the program. And what the province indicated that they would be looking for is meters as a tool for water conservation. So it would be really that they would like to have a strong commitment that the entire program will be developed. Thank you.
Thank you. Follow up?
And the full the title of the program, the full metering program, is still in development. I'm guessing it's not like a written program, so it's still kind of being developed.
It is on the work plan to be developed in 2021, flowing into 2022. 2020, flowing into 2021. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you. Let's move on. Annex GG. This is Regional Water Service. Annex GG, pages 191, 2003. And this is with regards to reservoir. We have lots of budget proposals that have already been approved in there and incorporated. If you go down to page 193, it lists what we've requested from staff. The first part was with regards to the capital water main replacement increase, Church Road, emergency water storage tanks, vehicle, and then with regards to development, reservoir development, and water governance. Those are the ones we are discussing today. So any questions, first of all, from directors on any of these recommendations? Director Ties.
The budget request number 7, I guess. Just wondering how some analytical tools like the ones that Ecologics has about the condition of our water mains could potentially save us from digging up some and identifying others that we feel like might not anyway, to assess the conditions of the pipes and then save us some money in the long run to see where the weak ones are and where the and where some are that we thought might have to be replaced but are still okay.
So this is Ecologics, the company that actually helps identify where leaks are in pipes. Is that correct?
Yeah, but
yes.
they also you can also use a tool to use to actually sound the condition of the pipe and how thick the walls are. And so I'm wondering if such a tool might be a good idea, and if that could be part of the contemplations on water main assessments.
So this is a sidebar kind of thing to putting aside $650,000 as a base budget increase for water main replacement, helping determine which water mains actually get replaced. Okay. Over to staff.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're currently looking into leak detection equipment. We've had a person come up recently to try and show us their equipment, which I believe does what you're discussing. The mains we've identified right now are mains that we identified without that technology, such as asbestos cement water main replacement, undersized water mains looping that's required. So the specifications we're looking for that we're currently identifying is more related to, say, age or the quality, the type of pipe, and that could be a valuable tool to tell us if wall thickness is going in some of our mains, but I could see that it might identify other sections of main that we haven't identified due to makeup of the pipe or the size of the pipe.
Any other questions? And did you want to take these one at a time and go through them? Okay. So let's look at the recommendation, the first one on page 194 for the water main replacement base budget increase. Director McMahon.
I'm happy to move that one to be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget.
And is there a seconder for that one? Seconded. Okay. No further questions? Question? Director Ties?
I'm just clarifying, is it the full 650,000 that you're looking at, or is it the 325 this year and 325 next year? Just
Oh, sure. Throw a dilemma at me. Is there a question of staff capacity? I mean, is this, let's go over to staff.
Thank you. It's a good question. Our work plan for this year is already pretty significant. If it would be 650, if the board would support 650, what we would do, we would expand some projects we already have on a work plan for this year to make them larger, to make the contract bigger, so they would flow into 2021. And as a result, there will be some additional staff time required, but it would be limited given that we're just expanding the scope of projects that we're already planning to do. I think the big question is the level of reserves. If we would not, if we go for 325 this year and 325 next year, because we're already, the user fees and parcel tax are already being set, the additional 325 would flow into reserves and can potentially be used later at a later date, or this year or next year for another project.
Director Lee.
I actually have two questions. I thought we'd already set the parcel taxes. That's my first question.
Tina?
So when we provided the rate for 2020, it was in anticipation of the full 650. And so as was indicated, it's just the difference between the reserve contribution. But I think what we're looking towards establishing is a water mains replacement program. So acknowledging that some years you might need $1 million, and some years you might only need $500,000. But instead of coming to the board every year, and that's what we're looking towards, is setting a program together. So we're not coming cap in hand each year. We're setting a program together.
Director Lee?
I think you just answered my question, but I'd like to be sure. If we get a grant, then we just simply use less of the reserves. Is that the thought process on it?
So there's nothing contemplated at the moment for a grant to have water mains replacement for regional water. It doesn't mean we won't look to them, because we were very successful in the North and South Pender. So the short answer is yes, absolutely. We'll always look for grant opportunities, and yes, it would mean that you would not have to take it from the existing service.
Another piece of that, though, is if we're applying for a grant, then we typically need to have our portion of funding available for the contribution. So if we put the 650 in now and we don't spend it, it's actually sitting there in anticipation of a potential grant that we could leverage. Okay. Yes. Director McMahon. Any other questions? Director Todd.
I'd actually be in favor of phasing it in. I know the money's already committed through the fees and charges, but to dedicate that 325 to reserves right off the top, I think would help with staff workflow for the year. Like, I don't think they can go out and spend another $650,000 this year on top of everything else we're piling on top of them, on top of department restructuring, on top of possible staffing changes. So
I think I heard staff say that if we gave it to them, they would spend it this year because they would expand the projects that they already have in the books. So I don't think there's an issue with spending it. Director McMahon.
Okay, got my train of thought back there. Just in terms of communicating this to residents, it would be helpful if we could have a little bit of material about what it costs us when mains blow up, because those kind of emergency repairs must be costly to the organization and take away our capacity to deal with other things. So it would be helpful for me to know that so I can communicate it to the residents.
Another piece of that is how much the infrastructure is that we have in the ground right now, like the cost of that. Because when we look at how much is there, $650,000 isn't much compared to the massive amount of infrastructure and the cost of that.
Thank you for the suggestion. In terms of outreach or information, we'll definitely work on that. And your comment sparked some other ideas in my head, but that's fine. In terms of the actual value, I think that's all part of the asset management work that we're starting to undertake on the regional water system. We have over 300 kilometers of mains in our system, and the actual value of the total value still has to be determined. Thank you.
So even that piece is something important to communicate, because that feeds into some of the other budget items that we've put around the asset management, et cetera, right? Tina, you were looking to talk about something? No? You're just leaning over the table? Okay. Director McMahon.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that specific examples are helpful because I'm able to talk to folks about Chester and that particular pipe. And then there was one on Reed Road that went bluey. So, yeah, that's a technical term. Kablooey, yes. But anyway, specific examples that we can use in our areas to talk to people with are very helpful.
Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Director Toth, the phased approach. What I think I'm hearing staff is that expanding the scope will save money rather than phasing it. So I think that's what I heard them say, is they can spend it, they just need to expand the scope, and in the long run it will save money because you're expanding the scope. That's my interpretation.
All right, so I will go back to Director McMahon, and she can answer Director Toth, or Ty's question around, is it 650 we're looking at or 325 incrementally?
650.
All right, so. Any other questions or comments? On the motion? The motion is that we increase, yes, it was seconded, $650,000 increase to the, water main replacement capital budget. So it's a base budget increase of $650,000, and that has been seconded, and it's to be approved and incorporated in the 2020 budget. All those in favor? Thank you. Next item. Page 196, Groundwater Investigation Phase 2, Part 2. Director McMahon.
Okay, somewhere here it says that if we wanted to go cheap on this, we could reduce the number of sites to 3. I was just wondering if the 4 sites listed are in order of preference, or what's the weakest site there?
Staff?
Order of preference, yes.
And the reduction would be $60,000. Director Tice?
Yeah, my question is around the District Lot 1312. Would we have to talk to the private property owner, or would this be within the park allocation that is already SCRD land?
It will be within the park allocation, correct. Thank you.
Any other questions? Director Hiltz?
I am unprepared for this report. I'll say that. So the targets, I'm particularly interested in the 1312 target. Like that seems to be kind of a new area of exploration, and there was also discussion about a possible reservoir site. That has been lurking. Is that right? 1312? Yeah, 1312 is the one that they were looking at, a possible reservoir site. So I'm wondering about how the 1312 showed up as a target when it hasn't been I think in the preliminary discussions of waterline or so.
Thanks for the opportunity to clarify. 1312, when developed, the developer drilled some wells for the development itself, and while doing so, the yields from those wells were such that they connected with us, like in the sense of that there might be opportunities there for a larger well. So it's really based on empirical evidence that we included this site here to assess further.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I should have asked. Elphinstone west of Chester Creek, there's quite a bit of it there. Any general ideas of where you had in mind?
Thank you for the question. We will be looking to clarify, this would be like the Soames watershed is more on the one outer side of the large water aquifer that's flowing up Mount Elphinstone. This would be on the west side of it, and it would be unconnected. Chester Creek is about, there is the dividing between more towards the Gibson Aquifer, what is currently still called the Gibson Aquifer, that's used by the city, town of Gibsons, as well as the area to the west. Our hydrogeologist is of the understanding that there might be good potential there in that area without impacting other large users in the area. And our first look would always be on sites that are owned by the SRD in some way, shape, or form. And there are some parks in the area, so we would be definitely looking at Whispering Park, et cetera, et cetera.
So Director Toth and then Director Lee.
I've got a two-part question. Number 2, East Porpoise Bay. Is that Grey Creek?
It's not. It's a separate watershed that's flowing down there. Grey Creek is already approved, I think, or is it also on the list here? That's it. Grey Creek is a separate watershed, and it's a separate project because it's already flowing out of an earlier phase. No, so it will be a separate site.
Okay. My second part of the question was assuming Grey Creek, but that's okay. It was just concerns related to water main sizing out the East Porpoise Bay side. As we move forward with East Porpoise Bay or Grey Creek, are the water mains out there sized appropriately? What sort of stage are they in their asset lifespan? Are they going to need to be replaced anyways? Is it an opportunity to upsize in preparation? That sort of thing.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The water mains currently flowing towards along the east side of the inlet would not be sufficient for if we would have a large production well at Grey Creek or East Porpoise Bay. So they would need to be upsized for one of the two projects. We are currently using them in the summer when we divert actually water from Grey Creek. They're sufficient for that, but it's a smaller amount than that we're targeting in this case.
Okay, just before I go to Director Lee, on page 192, budget proposal 20 is for the groundwater investigation phase 3 Grey Creek. That was already incorporated and it's funded. All right, so that's already there. Page 192, budget proposal 20 is Grey Creek. Okay. You missed it? Okay. That was your question, so you're good? Okay, so you're off my list. Okay, I've got Director Hiltz and then Director McMahon.
It's the precise locations, and I guess I'm wondering a little bit about the phasing of the 4 targets, and I guess the economies of scale of mobilizing at once the rig, and is there a contemplation of doing any geophysics in terms of zeroing in on the targets as a way to explore for what's under the ground?
Thank you for the question. It's currently not recommended by our hydrogeologist as being an appropriate tool to further identify if a site would qualify or not.
And the follow-up is the phasing is looking for multi-year projects rather than the single-year projects. So I'm just wondering about the economies of scale of 4 targets versus 2 targets, and is there a way to kind of do this over 2 years?
There is a significant economy of scale here in terms of mobilization cost. For example, for the first phase 2 part, the drilling company came over from Duncan. So there is significant cost associated with the development, with the mobilization and the demobilization cost. And the same is valid for the pumping test contractors. If they're on coast and they can do all 4 sites back to back, there is a significant economy of scale benefit there.
Director McMahon?
Okay, I don't want to second guess staff on this, so I'm just going to point out that DL 1312 and Whispering Firs Park are about 8 stones throw away from each other. So I'm not sure that both of those would be useful. Just saying. And when you do bring the equipment over, if you could just give a heads up to the Farmers Institute, because I know that some of them aren't interested in drilling wells, and if the company's already here, they can get a much better deal on the well test drilling. Yeah.
Economies of scale. All right. So there's a recommendation on page 196. Director Hiltz. Oh, Tina, do you want to speak first?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that it says it's from capital reserves, but because we're in feasibility, this would actually come out of operating reserves.
Okay. Moved by Director McMahon. Second, Director Hiltz. Any further questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. I just want to make a note here about operating. Thank you. Next item. Did we move groundwater investigation phase 4 Church Road?
We moved the $9 million.
We moved the $9 million, so this is pretty much done. Do the budget proposal. Okay. Budget proposal. We need to do the budget proposal. Director Pratt?
I'll move option 1, that the budget proposal be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget.
Thank you. And is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. Page 199, Regional Water Reservoir Feasibility Study Phase 4. And any questions about this one? Director McMahon.
Yeah, I'm slightly confused. Is this the giant fairy bathtub?
Before you get into that, maybe you talk about this one and the next one together.
Okay.
Because the next one is, okay.
I'll do. As an introduction, this is indeed the phase 4 is the additional work that the board recommended us to do a budget proposal on related to Site B, which is indeed the picture with the BC Ferry on it. In round 1, this budget proposal was brought forward for 225, and we're now proposing 250, and the reason is we've, together with the contractor, we further assessed what it would take to actually identify the hydro potential and the economic value. And we thought that with a budget of 250, we would be able to address those additional factors, those factors a little bit more in more detail. So this would allow us to do the geophysical work, geotechnical drilling, update the permitting, costing, and design, as well as to determine an optimization of the design based on the economic value of the material in the ground. And given that we think that with permitting required for us to do the drilling and the actual analysis of the information, it is very likely that we would not be able to present the results back until Q4 realistic, early Q4 this year. So that's why we didn't feel it to be prudent to already have a budget proposal for the actual development and of that reservoir. And that ties in, I think, into a discussion we had and the board had on November 21st, where where staff understood that the board was willing to go one additional step in terms of clarifying and see if we can lower the cost or increase the volume, but not fully commit yet to the development of the reservoir, which would be the next budget proposal. And that's why we discontinued that at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
As you all know, I voted against this the last time. We have a lot of good projects in the pipeline here, some really good well prospects that I'm thinking. We also have a lot of projects, period, and I'm inclined to think that we're throwing good money after bad here. I know not everybody feels that way, but I'm against this one.
All right, Director Hiltz.
A question for staff, I guess. How close does this put the project to a shovel-ready project in terms of eligibility for grants and stuff? Like how, I don't know, if there's a scale of 1 to 5 to shovel-ready, would we be in the 2, 3, or are we closer to 5?
This would be on a scale to 1 to 5, about a 3.
Director Lee?
If we decided to put this off maybe until next year, once we know more about the wells, would we be losing any sunk costs, and would we be increasing the cost, or would we simply be delaying getting it done by a year?
Thank you, Director. So the biggest cost potential would be construction cost escalation if you were to put it off in waiting a year, as prices do tend to have been going up for construction purposes and engineering costs as well.
Director Lee, follow up?
Yeah, a year might be an overstatement, though, because would we start this phase immediately and actually get it done in 2020, or were we planning in the work plan not to start it until Q4 2020?
No, as proposed in the budget proposal, we would begin this portion of the work upon council adoption, board adoption immediately. Particularly, we will be doing geotechnical and geophysical analysis of the Site B location, using those results to determine the depth of bedrock, and then from there revise the construction cost estimate to basically ratchet down that estimate cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Director Hiltz.
I feel for Director McMahon's point of view, and if it was coming out of taxation, I think I'd be kind of going there, but because it's operating reserves, my understanding is operating reserves are kind of there to move these kinds of projects forward. So I asked the question. So I'd be kind of interested from a staff perspective of, is this somehow factor into that icky feeling in your gut that you're getting about this project.
Tina?
So I think one of the unique challenges with the past funding model is that these particular projects are not contemplated in that funding model. So the operating reserves that are there now and the funding that we have really on a yearly basis when we approve don't target these funds are not targeted for this initiative. I think that's what's recognized is that we've gone a different direction, and both for many factors, and I think everybody understands what those factors are. So I think that's what we're trying to do is expedite, whether it's the rate models, the water sourcing policy, all the other budget initiatives that are here are to understand what is the plan, what are our needs going forward, and the funding associated with it. Now, having that said, there are funds available, so in the interim, there's most certainly this would be an appropriate use of these funds.
Okay, I'm going to go in here before Director Lee. So right now, we've said we would potentially build a reservoir at Site B, but we don't know yet if the site is actually viable. This information, these studies, etc., would actually let us know, yes, it is an option, or no, it's not. Is that correct?
That's correct. And this would bring our work on this site to a level that also of cost estimate that I would say would allow us for a comparison with let's say the results of the part 2 of the groundwater. Well, we can say, okay, this is a decent cost estimate for the well development on this site, and this is a decent cost estimate for a reservoir development on this site. To add to that, as I indicated, we would need a permit to do our geotechnical and geophysical work here on this site. The backlog at Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operation Rural Development for these kind of permits is usually about 2 years, and I have a commitment that we can get a permit in a couple of weeks, maybe 2 months, if we move ahead this year, if we feel that this is still a high priority. So under that direction, under that commitment from Minister Donaldson. And I'm not sure if that commitment would still be there if we delay this project for a year. Thank you.
Director Lee?
I was just follow-up question to the fact we're using operating rather than capital. I believe if we do go ahead, we can then capitalize the operations portion of it. So that's the risk we're running here. I'd just like to know if that's true.
Okay, Tina, do you want to answer that piece?
So if this does materialize to a capital project, we would revisit that from an accounting standpoint for sure. And most certainly any work here, we would, of course, be looking for grants.
Okay, I've got Director Toth, and then Hiltz, and then, Ties, and then McMahon.
I'm cautiously in favor of moving this forward so that we do have that apples-to-apples comparison if we're looking at wells and things like that. It's probably the last step forward on this that I'm going to support unless something comes back looking really good. And with that, I'd like to actually move option 1 on this.
All right, is there a seconder for that recommendation? Seconded? Okay. So then I have Director Ties and then Director McMahon.
Yes. I'm in many ways with Director McMahon, because right now with that ballooning cost, it really does seem like we're heading up the wrong path. But there are some potentials for the cost per cubic meter actually going down in the future, whether that be through the sale of some of the aggregate that comes out of it, or whether it is through it being able to actually go bigger than we have initially anticipated. So, so I think I'm going to be voting for this, as Director Toth said, last step, unless we have some really good news.
And Director McMahon.
And you know, I'm always sympathetic with a quest for more information because it's good to have the data. But personally, I'm not a fan of surface water because of the treatment requirements. I don't want to be more reliant on Chapman than we already are. And I am very, very concerned with the GHG emissions associated with this project. So there is no way that I would vote for it. Not unless we had exhausted every other option for water on the Sunshine Coast. And we're far, far from there. We've got lots of really good projects in the pipeline right now. So I continue to oppose this.
Director Pratt.
Thank you. I think in regard, and I hear the concerns of GHG emissions and relying still on one system. But I'm inclined to vote with this to kick it down the road a little bit more and see. We still, yes, we do have lots of other projects that are coming together, but at the same time, we still know that we will have a deficit, even with Church Road on side. And if these other wells end up not, these other investigation pieces end up not coming to fruition for whatever reason, then, you know, then we would then be a year or 2 years from now going, okay, well, now let's look at the reservoir project, and we may not have the same political will that we need at the province. So I'm inclined to say, yes, let's push this one more further.
All right. Any other questions or comments? So we have a recommendation on the floor. Is everybody clear on what we're voting on? This is, who's voting on this? Everybody except Area A, I believe, and Town of Gibsons. Everybody except Area A and Town of Gibsons. Area A votes as well? Regional? Okay. All those in favor? Thank you. Opposed? Would you like that recorded? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Co-Chair. And then this is a question for Tara. Item 25, budget item 25, where we're looking to postpone that. Do we need to do anything for that? There's a recommendation. Page 191. All right, so there's a recommendation on page 191. Moved, seconded. This is postponing the study phase 4 on the reservoir. Everybody got that? You with us, Director Hiltz? Mostly. So we're looking at the top of page 191, and this is for the recommendation, the budget recommendation for feasibility study phase 4. Sorry. Development phase 1 be postponed until we have the information back with regards to feasibility study phase 4. So we're not going to develop until we have so we're not putting any money into that right now. Into development.
I'm really gapping here. I was back at, where were we?
Okay. Let me find that.
Oh, the one that's been all crossed.
The one that's crossed off, that's right. We're just making a recommendation that we're not moving forward with the one that's crossed off.
Yeah, I'm still on budget item 24. That was done. We're moving to 25.
Right.
And
that's right. That's page 200.
Yeah. Have we had discussion on this? Or?
Yes. That was, he tied the two of them together. So the one before this was looking at the feasibility study. What he said was that the feasibility study phase 4 would probably not bring us information until the end of this year. And so they would not get to the development phase, and so do not want to fund that in this budget.
Right, okay.
Okay?
Feasibility versus development.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
I'm there now.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah, no problem. We have to keep together, move it forward. All right, so there's a recommendation. Did somebody make that recommendation? Yes? Okay. Moved and seconded? All right, all those in favor? Thank you. Next, emergency water storage tanks. Page 201. And there was information requested on additional uses for these when this came before us at committee. So any further questions, information, clarification? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, to summarize the previous discussion is, was it for potable water or not potable water? And I don't actually see the language of potable. So this is for both non-potable and potable uses, is what I'm seeing.
Thank you, Chair. It probably won't be used for potable water. It would be used for like a location on Eastbourne where we might need more storage, or a location where we would need water like at the arena. If it was required for potable, we would disinfect it and send coliform samples out and set it up in that style. So there are the two options, but I think initially it would be used for non-potable.
Follow-up?
Could you mention the Eastbourne piece again? Because it sounds like that would be a potable use for Eastbourne rather than a non-potable, so I'm not quite clear.
Yes, you're correct. It could be used in that situation where we would store potable water at the Eastbourne system.
Any other questions on this? Would someone like to move the recommendation? Moved? Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. Next, 31 on page 202. This is item or function 370, vehicle purchase for strategic infrastructure division. And this would be an electric vehicle. Director Toth.
I just had a really quick question in here. In reading through it, are we looking at one vehicle or two? Because there's some references to vehicle and there's some reference to vehicles.
Staff?
Vehicles.
Okay.
It will be 2 vehicles.
Director Ties.
I'll move this one, option 1, that the following budget proposal be approved and incorporated in the 2020 budget.
And is there a seconder? Seconded. Any other comments or questions before we move this forward? All those in favor? Thank you. That is number 36. No, number 35 complete. Number 36, Annex HH, pages 204 to 207. This is North Pender Harbor Water Service. A number of budget proposals were approved and incorporated. This is come forward at the request of Director Lee. Do you have any questions about this, Director Lee?
Yes. I believe that this has actually been brought forward by our improvement district as a public safety issue. I'd like to have an option that allows it to be done this year. And I'm not exactly sure where that option would be here. Do I have to make a motion, or how would it, interesting how to get that done?
So we're looking at page 205?
Yes, 205 okay. And 206.
So this is for the generator?
Yes. Just so everybody's aware of what's happened here is that there was a generator in the station and it was taken out. And there's apparently a portable pump available if the power goes out, but the portable pump is kept in Seashelt here. A generator, sorry, portable generator. And after the fire that we had up there and the fact that Pender Harbor is so remote from anywhere else, it's felt that there should be a generator in the Pender Harbor pumping station, North Pender Harbor pumping station. There is a generator in the South Pender pumping station. There is one in Chapman. I mean, if we want to move that up, it's okay with me. But I do believe that the North Pender should have a generator. Also, talking to the chair of the improvement district, and by the way, an improvement district is an order of government. So they have made a request that we do put a generator in there for purposes of ensuring that there's an adequate supply of water in case of a power failure and a fire, which is, I believe, a very realistic scenario given the climate change things we're going through. So,
on page 206, I think staff have recognized that because they've indicated that they will review opportunities to apply and receive an emergency preparedness grant to offset costs associated with the purchase, delivery, planning, and installation. They recognize that it is an emergency preparedness issue.
Yes. But I would like to have a recommendation that says we go forward with this, but I don't know how we would go forward. Perhaps Tina could suggest a way of going forward to finance this because there isn't enough reserves.
I think there are sufficient reserves. This reduces the reserves, I think. Is that correct, Tina?
Yeah, so correct. On page 207, there is the reserve table. We've just shown the capital reserves, so there are some small operating reserves. We've already identified there's a lot more needs in this service from an infrastructure perspective. So we could also look for other sources. You could use the Municipal Finance Authority equipment financing loan and fund this over a 5-year period. That's an alternative as well.
Okay. Did you follow up, and then we'll go to Director Toth and then McMahon.
Would that require an AAP to do, or could we do it without that?
No. So that program is for equipment only and doesn't require public approval. So you'd be amortizing it over a 5-year period. So, of course, obviously the cost of the equipment will be more because you're going to have borrowing costs. But currently, I think the last I saw, you're at about an interest rate of 2.5, 2 3/4. So from a borrowing perspective, it's quite low. It's an option.
So the opening balance in reserves is $461,000. There's a contribution this year of $65,000. If you took out the $125,000, you'd be left with $401,000 in the operating reserve. Sorry, capital reserve for this one. Director Lee.
Yes, but I understand that this isn't the whole picture in that we have a need to replace quite a bit of pipe at the same time, and that with the plan it was to use all of that operating reserve to actually replace the pipe. So we're going to need some more money, I think. So.
Okay, we'll let you sit with that for a minute. We'll get the other directors. We've got Director Toth, McMahon, Hiltz, and Ties.
Most of it was I was going to point out that chart on the top of page 207, and that staff have identified it as a purchase for 2020. One suggestion for the director would be that if it is of an urgent nature for that area, we could approve it and forward it to board this week, which gives staff a jump start on acquisition. So.
Okay, Director McMahon. Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm on page 205. It's about the not financially sustainable aspect of the reserves, and what. So this looks like a balancing of risk to the community from a fire protection versus a financial risk. So I'm trying to understand where those risks are, and then the MFA equipment, how that could play into it, and this would be within the North Pender function. Just tidying up some ends there.
And staff? Did you get all that?
Could you say that question again, please?
Sorry, yeah. It's about the risk. So there's a financial risk of not having the reserves, and then Director Lee's community feels that there is a risk to their property and safety. And then there's the MFA equipment. So the first two are the balancing of the risks for what the public sees the risk as versus what staff sees the risk as, and the financial risk. And I'm trying to weighing the risks. And from the risk as a corporation, or does this risk reside solely with the North Pender, or does this risk spread to the broader SCRD? I'm not sure if that clarified it or not. But.
So if I can talk in operations words, I suppose the current use of our existing generator is for the entire Sunshine Coast Regional District. So the risk is even amongst everywhere except some places are closer to Sechelt. So for Langdale, like, for example, this is the backup generator for that. As per the service to get to North Pender Harbor, it might take a couple hours to get that generator up there. That's the risk. And I certainly will acknowledge, Director Lee, that there was a generator in there, and it met end of life, and we chose to provide the service with this portable generator. The risk would be reduced if there was an on-site generator because it would turn on immediately. As for financing, I think Tina might be better to discuss that.
Director McMahon?
I don't know. There seems to be a pattern here. Well, my comments are is that
it says choice.
Yes, it does. It sounds to me like that MFA loan might actually be a good option, and that considering I don't have to pay for it, I'd be happy to second your motion. And the one question I do have, whether a diesel generator would be the best option, considering that it hopefully isn't being used a lot, and that it and that something like a propane generator, propane lasts longer as a fuel and it doesn't need as much maintenance, but I don't know, there might be some more expertise required in this regard than what I or President staff have to offer, but I'm just wondering, why not propane?
Staff?
We certainly could review that. My initial assumption, it will be a more expensive generator because diesels are more standard. The benefit with having a mobile generator as well is we could move it over Daniel Point. That pump station currently isn't backed up either. So the other thing is that we'd like to review the size of the generator. The generator that we currently have has its ability. It's a 60 kilowatt generator. Maybe a larger one would be better suited there. I'm not sure, to provide even more of a service. So we will review the size of the generator, the fuel that burns, and whether it's mobile or fixed. The old one was fixed. It was a very large generator in the station itself. So that's what we'll have to review and then move forward with purchasing it.
Okay, so Director Lee, if you wanted to do MFA financing for this, you could follow option 1, that this funding request be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget, with financing be from MFA, or for funding MFA, Municipal Financing Authority, rather than capital reserves. That's an option to you. This is on page 205. So we would do exactly like we would do before with option 1, but we would indicate that we change the funding source. Would you like Tara to read that out? First of all, do you want to go with the MFA financing or capital reserves?
I would like to leave that up to staff when they review the whole package. But
it's not an option. We have to indicate here.
it's been requested that we do borrow the money and get it done this year.
So Tara, how about if you read us a resolution?
The question I have is that I'd like the staff to review the whole picture and make sure we got the right solution here. I understand the generator in the main plant is a good thing and it will service most of the community. But I believe you need a backup generator for a lot of things, including we're going to need a whole bunch more with our wells. So are we in a good part of the world right now with the whole picture? Is there a standard? Has it been reviewed from a climate change and a risk?
I think what Shane Walkie said was that part of this, once we've approved it, that's the work that they have to do. Determine the sizing, determine the fuel, determine where it's going to be, all of those kinds of things. Yes. Yes. Okay. So we'll have Tara read out a recommendation.
And that the following budget proposal be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget. Budget Proposal 7, Emergency Generator, $125,000 funded through MFA 5-year equipment financing loan, and further that a loan of up to $125,000 for a term of 5 years be requested through the Municipal Finance Authority Equipment Financing Program.
You do that very well. Would you like to make that recommendation?
I'd like to make that recommendation.
Perfect. And Director Ties has already indicated he will second it. Director Pratt, comment.
Do you want to request that to be moved to board this week so it can be acted on more quickly? Or no? Or okay. Oh, well, can of worms. It's just open.
Well, I don't think it's that emergent. So we don't want to get into the practice of doing that because essentially it is really for emergent. Your financial plan bylaw is really the authority to expend. So I would just caution because I think there is some scoping. There's quite a bit of work to do. So even if you did do that, I don't think we'd be in a position to be able to purchase it tomorrow. So I think based on the timeline, we're good. So good suggestion. But now I see when I give you tools, you run with them. So no, I think we're okay.
Director Hiltz.
I guess the consideration of a fixed generator versus a mobile for that service. And I hear Daniel point in that if you want to increase the resilience by having a generator for emergency because of the isolation of Pender, is a mobile more versatile than a fixed? And whether that has to be included in, or that scoping would come later, like because I'm not sure if.
We will do that scoping and seek board direction if we feel that it is appropriate once we move along with the project.
Not tomorrow. No. Any other questions, comments? Director Lee.
I might be asking a question with no answer, but do you think we could have this done by this summer? Is that, or would that come after you scope it out?
Staff?
Staff work really quickly, but sometimes there's a lead time for equipment like this. Like vehicles takes 3 months, brand new vehicles. So I can see that being a limiting factor. You know, even if we got this out the door and put a tender out for 3 or 4 weeks, they might say delivery time is 3 months or 4 months on that generator.
Okay, Director Hiltz.
The answer is we'll do the best we can.
That's right. That's right. Director Hiltz.
It'd be on the funding requirement. If it goes MFA, there's a borrowing cost, so that would also have to be funded. So is the 125 the right amount for this budget proposal?
Staff?
So that would be part of what we would include in there is the ongoing funding. So there would be a principal and interest, and so all of that will be put in now that we have this different recommendation.
And put in means where does it go?
It would be put into the budget.
And the funding amount?
So the 125 will remain the same. So
okay.
You're approving the capital expenditure. The repayment too, we would actually bring when the actual purchase of the equipment is done. I don't know if you recall, but when we actually go ahead with executing the borrowing, you have a subsequent staff report that gives you all of the details, and then that gets put into the budget and affirmed, etc.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, so we have a recommendation in front of us that this be approved, incorporated into the 2020 budget, and that the funding source be MFA financing. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on to item 37, Annex II, pages 208 to 216, wastewater treatment services. Yes. We did approve the Square Bay infiltration reduction budget proposal. This is looking at wastewater treatment plant asset management plans. This is another report that came to us at one of the previous meetings with regards to a grant proposal, and this is approving the funding from our side, from the reserves, for these various ones to do the feasibility studies. Tina.
So this is one of those interesting nuances, is that we can actually put something into our financial plan that's contingent upon grant funding. So at this point, this is just receipt of information. Once we find out by the grantor, we'll bring this forward for a financial plan amendment. So there's actually no decision at this point to do with budget proposal number 2. We had hoped to find out by the grantors by now, but it'll still take a couple months potentially.
Thank you. So we'll look at number 3 and number 4. They're both new. So I'll turn those over to staff. And 5. Is there another one? And 6. Sorry. Is there another one? No, 6. Okay. So over to you.
How about I introduce number 3 first? In the asset management plans, Wood Creek Park inspection chambers were noted to be damaged and causing infiltration. The inspection chambers are basically where they stop and we start kind of thing. It's a pipe that you can look down into the sewage and see the sewage going by, and that's an indicator of everything's working fine and you can do flushing, that kind of thing. But there's been damage to some of these cleanouts, as we call them, and they need to be repaired. That's what item number 3 is.
All right. Any questions on that? Director McMahon.
I am not going to ask any more questions about sewage right now, but this obviously needs to be repaired, so I'm happy to move item number 3 to the 2020 budget.
All right. And seconded? Question? Dr. Hiltz? Okay. All those in favor? Thank you. And then Director Hiltz.
I'm going to ask staff if I remember this coming up in the public information, and the public was bringing this information forward. Did this awareness come from that information session at the Frank West Hall? Is that or was it known by staff before?
Thank you. It was identified through the CCTV inspections.
All right. Let's move on to item number 4, page 211.
Thank you. This is similar. It was identified in the asset management plans that there's some damage to a collection line in a manhole that needs to be repaired as soon as possible because it's causing infiltration.
And this is for the Lee Bay collection system. Any questions? Director Lee?
I noticed that the next one is Lee Bay as well. We can probably do them both.
Did you want to address that?
Sure. Item number 5, it was brought up at the community discussions, but also in the asset management plan that the vegetation may be causing some impact to the piping. There's some distribution piping to the field that needs some attention, and the field itself has some repairs required, and this would correct the vegetation and the damage brought up at the meetings and in the asset management plan.
Thank you. Would you like to move those recommendations?
Yes.
So it's 4 and 5?
Yes.
And that they be approved and incorporated into the 2020 budget?
Yes.
Thank you. Seconded? Any other questions, comments? All those in favor? Thank you. So, item number 6.
Thank you. So this is an item following up from our previous discussion, improving community engagement and continuing along those lines. This is a small budget item to allow us to conduct 15 engagement sessions over the summer and provide some refreshments and various consumables.
Thank you. Any, Director Lee?
Recommendation that we do this too.
Is there a seconder for that? Lots of seconders. Any other questions, comments? Director Hiltz.
I just see that as great value. $2,500 for 15 sessions. Great value.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. The session with Wood Creek Park is going to be fairly straightforward, but getting everybody together for Sunnyside is going to be a bit of an effort, and it's really important because that one has got to be dealt with ASAP. I'm happy to help in any way I can.
All right, Tina.
Pointing that we're going to try to leverage some of the joint use availability, and that's why some of the cost is lower. So,
Director Pratt.
Yes, just going to echo the other comments. Great value for money. So glad to see this going forward, and I'm sure I'll echo the other directors. We're all happy to help out wherever possible, as well as attend.
All right. I'm going to put this to a vote. All those in favor? Thank you. So Tara handed me a little sticky note. Just so we have a record, that's budget item 2. So this is for the feasibility studies. She would like a motion put forward that it be deferred pending receipt of the grant, just so there's a record and it can come back once we hear about the grant. Moved, seconded. Any other questions about that? All in favor? Thank you. That item is complete. So, do we want to get into number 38, joint use taxation? And then it'll probably be time to break for lunch, and we'll do library after, and then do our in-camera session at the end. Over to you,
thank
Tina.
you, Chair. So subsequent to reviewing the actual budget for 2020, staff identified that there was actually no taxation input in for joint use. And so recognizing that over the last 2 years, because we haven't really accounted for this type of arrangement, we should put a reasonable amount, understanding that GM Hall had said there is discussions with SD 46. So staff are recommending that we put $15,000 in taxation for joint use for 2020.
Okay, so I think Tara's probably putting a recommendation together. Director Mann?
I'm trying to think how to be tactful here. It's not my strong suit. So one of the things I hear in the community a lot is how difficult it is to make use of school facilities. So if there is any way that we can work with SD 46 to make it easier to get access to these publicly funded facilities, that would be really great.
Director Pratt.
Okay. Seeing as I have a little bit of experience with this. So just to give the overview with SD 46, they do a central booking station, central booking through through the school district office, which was changed probably about 5 years ago. Before then, it was done at each school. So a lot of people, when they're going to book, they book immediately. They go to the school first, but that's not the process they have. There is a regulation, and if there is any school activity, you can get bumped, even if you are a paying person, because its preference is always given to students and school-based activities, and there's a whole regulation on it that I can circulate, that I can find, and I can circulate to directors, because then you can provide that to any community members and groups. Yeah, it can be a little cumbersome, but a lot of that is just in the communication back and forth, and that's something we can bring up at our meeting with the chair and vice chair of the SD 46 board, and we can discuss that with them, because I've heard that as well too. It's cumbersome.
Director McMahon? Director Hiltz then after.
Is there any way we can adjust our rates so that, so that we don't end up, it feels like this joint use thing is becoming much more expensive than we had anticipated. And it's not a cash transaction, as it were. I realize it's complicated, but just asking.
Staff?
So this would mean amending your fees and charges bylaw for community recreation, mostly, because it's mostly that's where the use from the school, from the reciprocal side for the regional district is being used. So staff would not recommend you do that just for this purpose. That would be interesting. I was trying to come up with.
It might be that we would want to, let's wait another year. I mean, it's only been, 2 years maybe that we've actually had this up and running. Prior to that, while we attempted to do something and we actually had an agreement, nothing really happened. So it's only been 2 years that it's been up and running. I think if we wait another year, we'll be at a place where we can actually come back and revisit this and look at how, are there tweaks to make to it? Are there changes to make to it going forward? So good point, but let's let staff work with that a little more.
Maybe we could book a board retreat at a school.
All right, Director Hiltz.
Yeah, just a question on the 15,000 number. We're looking at a $36,000 deficit. So rationale for the 15,000?
So in discussions with GM Hall, there is continued discussions with SD46, and I think internally as well. So the last budget proposal, trying to make awareness internally for us to be able to use it more. So it goes both ways. It's not just, I think to the chair's comment that we need to get a better understanding of how we can use both reciprocal arrangements is still to be determined. So, and one of the recommendations are out of the discussions with GM Hall is, does the regional district propose a cap? Because right now there isn't. So these are all the things that are being discussed right now. So we don't want to put too much in, but we want to put something in that we don't end up with a deficit. We can't foresee what it'll be next year, but at least mitigate.
Goldilocks number?
Pardon me?
Goldilocks number?
Yes. Okay.
Tara, would you like to read that? Do you want to speak first before we have the recommendation? Okay.
I know our OCP committee meets at the Roberts Creek Elementary School. I don't think they pay anything, but if they do, maybe that could be part of rolled in. And then our APC actually meets in the Roberts Creek reading room, and I'm pretty sure that we pay to rent that. Now, I don't want to take away funding from the RCCA, but this could be an opportunity where we can move the APC to the Roberts Creek Elementary and kind of take it down a bit.
Tina?
Without getting too much, we do have just received the stats from SD46, so they keep track of some of this. And we actually, there is some more work to do because we believe that we actually have our community schools who are leveraging this, which was not really intended. So I think there's some clarity to happen here because, again, if we're providing funding, say, for teen night, but they're leveraging joint use, like it's almost like a double dip. So we have to see who's using it, who can leverage it. I think that's the work of 2020. So we do have that data.
Perfect. Director Pratt?
Yes, and I would just concur with that. There's a lot of the use that would be, and I'm thinking of some recreational use that may not be part of our programming that could probably potentially fit under joint use, like in the Half Moon Bay area. I know that gym is booked all the time. It's not through SCRD programming, but it is community recreation. And I think there's a lot of stats that we could probably get from SD46. And I know it's not quite with us, but also I do know the community schools use it quite a bit from there.
So I do want to caution, though, when these are third-party, non-regional district programs, and so, these are sources of funds for the school districts to recover their own costs. So I'm not sure that would be sort of the contemplation if we opened this up, because I'm not sure what was intended here. So again, part of the work that needs to be developed.
All right. So I think we're going to cut that off at that point. Tara has a recommendation for us.
Recommended that for the 2020 budget, the school facilities joint use function 630 be increased by $15,000 funded through taxation.
And who would like to make that recommendation? Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Thank you. All right, I think it's lunchtime, and we will come back after lunch and go into library, and then we'll do a brief in-camera session before we wrap for the day. Thank you, everyone. Sophie, did you have questions? All right, we're all back. That's right. So we have 2 items left on our agenda. We have item number 6, Sechelt Public Library funding, and then we would go in camera under the same numbers that we did before, which is hidden in partway through our agenda. So I think staff were doing some consultation with the province and have some information for us. So I'll turn it over to them first.
Thank you, Chair. So the discussion was set around voting on resolutions. So just to be clear, we are in committee, and so the voting at committee is per the procedure bylaw, which means that the participants of this service are eligible to vote. And in a circumstance where there is only one participant in that service, that would mean all directors are entitled to vote. If a recommendation is made and passed, then it would proceed to board, at which time the rules of the Local Government Act would apply. So due to the uniqueness of this service arrangement, none of the special exceptions actually apply, so it would be a general corporate vote. So all directors would be entitled to vote, and there would be one vote each. But one question I do have is, what is the specific resolution that we would be voting on? Because there could be nuances to that, depending what the resolution ends up being that's put forward at board.
So you're asking, would we be putting forward a resolution for each service area individually, and then a resolution to put together a referendum or a memorandum of understanding that would come back to us, and all would vote on that who are signatories here potentially? Or do we do one, or are we doing one resolution with all the services in it?
So we're voting on the approval of the service agreement with the library? No?
Essentially, the first step in this process would be deciding on what the amounts are to be recovered through each service. So that's from a financial planning matter.
So further to that, because the way the library service is currently funded within the regional district, we have 3 electoral areas with 3 separate service establishment bylaws. And in that case, the same rule would apply. It would be all directors, one vote each, because even if we split the vote in each instance, no one director can be a deciding factor on the decision.
So in other words, even if we did one resolution with all 3, everybody would still vote?
Correct.
Okay. Is everybody clear on that?
So my gleeful statement that I don't have to vote on this is incorrect, right?
You're correct.
You're correct.
Anything else you'd like to share with us? Make our day.
Nothing further to add, just to emphasize that the kind of philosophy in terms of the Local Government Act is that the board makes a decision as a body, and it should be reflective of the region as a whole, which is difficult in this instance when you have 3 separate services and 1 electoral area in each service.
I understand the nuances of what you're saying. Thank you. Director McMahon?
Sorry, aren't there 4? There's A, B, D, and Sechelt.
District of Sechelt funds through our own budget. And it's the memorandum of understanding that actually has us do the contribution. SIGD, are they through here? No. They're as well, separate. Okay, Tina?
And I think this is part of what was contemplated in the report that was provided in September, which was discussing the pros and cons of establishing a regional district service. And I think even that too needs to be revisited for more understanding as to what that would mean. But it would be the dissolution of the individual services, but you would have more of a function that would represent like the Gibsons and District Library. So that's where this would be a little bit different, where because you just have one participant in each of these services, you're in this particular situation. If it was a Gibsons, you would be, in this particular instance, the participants of the service would be voting. But in any regard, these are financial plan decisions. So matters relating to the financial plan, that's the last, which is a board decision. But we have had examples here where items have not passed in committee, but then when it came to the financial planning decision, it was passed because you're voting as on the financial plan of which that item is included. Does that make sense? Because this all leads to the financial plan bylaw.
All right. So, Director McMahon?
So if I can get my head straight around this, the request that you are looking at right now is for a 4% increase over last year. Has that been decided, not decided? Where we stand on that?
Is it a 4% increase over last year? I'm not sure if that's what it is. Because of the capital, the one-time capital that we gave last year, I don't know what the percentage is.
I think it's closer to 6, maybe a little bit higher, because last year's base funding was 700 and something with about 41 or so thousand of special funding. So it's a little bit more. Tara might have the amount.
Thank you, Chair. According to the Sechelt Public Library budget, their 2019 funding received, which was the base funding, not including the capital projects, was $793,793, and this amount is $828,720, and it says the percentage change is 4.4%.
It's a spreadsheet. I think you're checking it.
Created by Microsoft.
Okay. 4.4. That's 4.4%. I just did it. Okay, so we have 3 areas that we're looking to put forward their information, what they would like to fund. Who would like to go first? Director Ties.
So here's my situation. With the 50% per capita allotment, I will still and the current budget requests, I will still be paying considerably more for the Sechelt Library than for the Gibsons and District Public Library, and of course also than the Roberts Creek Reading Room, yet the other two facilities are used more than the Sechelt Public Library. By whether it's the slog through Davis Bay or the fact that a lot of people, I guess, ride the ferry and maybe go use the Gibsons Public Library more. So for me, the 50% allotment, I feel, is generous. I'm hesitant to go for the 4.4% budget increase, considering we gave them a hefty raise last year. And I'll leave it at that for now.
I'm looking at Director Pratt or Director Lee. Who would like to go next?
I've said several times that I'll go with the 5.46 as option 1 and option 2, and all those options say. I'm reluctant at a 4%, but I'll go with what the majority say. 4% seems like a lot, but I'm okay with it.
So you would be looking at 33% of your served by
33% of
your
the
population.
26-24.
Okay.
$45,264 in the first option 1-3. Close to the same thing in option 1, option 2 says the same thing as far as area A goes.
Okay, and Director Pratt?
The 4% I'm reluctant to go for at this time. I'd rather see something a little bit lower, 2.5 to maybe 3. But 4% feels high. I mean, there was a big lift last year. I recognize, of course, the value in the library, the percentage, the number of people it serves. But the 4% increase is a little much when we have a lot of other projects also going on too.
Okay, I just want to point out they are going into budget to contract negotiations, right? That's one of the reasons for that, okay? Okay, so if you don't want to go 4%, what are you considering doing this year?
Hey, my thing's on here. I would be interested in District of Sechelt's thoughts on it. Are you comfortable with, I believe it's 4.5% at 826,720 total. Is that for, I'm talking 19 to 20.
It's in our budget. That's been proposed in our budget, yes.
And it is a 4%?
Yeah, 4.4%, yes.
4.4, yeah.
Yeah. Director Hill.
I guess I got to stay a little bit more informed here. So I'm looking at that spreadsheet, and the population served is a bit of a puzzle to me, because the provincial government has said that Area A is completely served. The AAP says the area is completely served. And the spreadsheet that I have it's listed as 866 people. So I'm going, how does the provincial say who, and the regional district asked for that, to have it wholly served and not to be wholly served. So how can you, how can the province say you're wholly served, the regional district asked to be wholly served for Area A, and yet it's not wholly served in the apportionment? And the other piece, I'm really digging into my memory here. In 2017, if I remember that when this issue was coming there was something in a report said that the funders will be looking for equity. This was about a per capita funding basis between Seashelt and Gibson's to kind of close that gap. And I'm wondering if there is a previous document that kind of directs the funders to a certain end. So I'm not sure if there's the two pieces, the population served and then previous reports about this closing the gap of equity on a per capita basis, which is still a metric that's out there for deciding relative service for libraries per capita funding. So I'm just trying to sort these pieces out.
So the previous MOU that was signed is the first ever that the funders had with the library. Prior to that, each year, the library would come to the regional district and the District of Seashelt and the SIGD and request funding. And it was based on whatever we chose to give them. So there was a lot of uncertainty around the funding for them. So there was a request then by the previous chair of the regional district to move forward with an MOU to give them some certainty around funding. And yes, those were the stated goals of the MOU. The foundation for funding at that time was based on, what started the MOU was based on the funding that had been done the previous year. So it was, I don't know, Roberts Creek said, this year we'll give you $50,000. I mean, whatever number, right? So it wasn't based on anything. There was no criteria for determining the split. So that MOU is now expired. Are we close to per capita, equity? Maybe. Closer. What the library actually found was that while that was the intent of the previous MOU, they actually found that during the 5 years they were getting further behind. And so they had to cut down on services. One of them that they had their children's librarian had actually resigned and moved away, and they didn't have the funds to replace her. And then the Seashelt Nation said, no, that's a service that you've identified in your list of services that you need to provide, and we particularly want that. And so they hired somebody part-time and eventually full-time. But the big lift that we gave them last year was to fill in some of those spaces that they didn't have before. And they feel that that is now the basis for moving forward. So they're using that and saying each year we need to, if we're going to do a 5-year agreement, we want to have an accurate or an adequate lift each year to deal with their rising costs as well. So where are they starting? This is what they're requesting, and that's the piece that we need to come up with some number that we're going to then have as a foundation for putting an MOU together as well going forward. Director McMahon.
It's not our role here to tell the library how to spend their money. They made a choice as to what their priorities are. And their priorities were not to have a children's librarian. They had X amount of money. They could have hired one. That's their decision. And for them to tell us it's our fault that they didn't have a children's librarian, I don't buy that. I have trouble with the per capita thing because it doesn't consider the catchment area in terms of distance, in terms of realistically how many people have good access to this library service. And I doubt the provincial figures consider that either. We end up comparing apples and oranges. As the Gibson's Library pointed out, the statistics collected by the library branch are not all that great at the moment. I'm going to stop for a minute.
Director Lee.
The history hasn't been very well documented. I did talk to my predecessor, Frank, who was one of the signatories of the very first agreement, MOU from the libraries. There was a study done, and I'm not sure what year, that said of the total people that were using the library from Area A, if you take all the people using the Seashelt Library and what percentage of Area A it was somewhere between 4 and 5% is what he told me. I tried to find the study, but I couldn't find it. But I did go over the amount that Area A give, and it fell in that every year of the MOU. I believe they were using that formula before the MOU as well, so it was just a continuation for Area A, but again, I'm not sure. The problem with Area A is, as was just stated, and its distance. When you're in Egmont, that's an hour and a half each way. Egmont does come down and use the Pender Harbor Reading Room, but they also have their own reading room and their own collection of books there as well. The chances of them coming to Seashelt's pretty slim. The same is true with people that live in Pender Harbor. And I'd like you to think about the fact, why do we have two libraries? Using the same logic we're using here, Seashelt residents are a whole lot closer to Gibsons than Pender Harbor residents are. Or for that matter, Gibsons is a whole lot closer to Seashelt than the Pender Harbor residents are. And Pender Harbor actually supports a reading room for that reason. It's social as well as a functional place. They actually go and read in their reading room, and they do contribute quite a bit to buying the books. They buy them themselves, the new books. So, just strictly on the use of the library as a traditional function, I struggle. I'm offering to go to 5.4. The Seashelt Library has been very good to our Pender Harbor Reading Room, and they're very happy with it. I am really, really, really struggling with the social aspect of a library. And when I look at both Gibsons and Seashelt, the majority of their efforts going into the social functions now that the government's downloaded on us. I don't know how you get out of that. But I do know that other than our homeless moving to Seashelt, which I'm pretty sure happens a lot. Other than that, though, I don't believe the seniors use it. The kids definitely don't. The after-hours homework thing that's supported, those things just aren't partaken by the Pender people. And I did talk to people that do use the library with young kids and confirmed that. And they're very adamant that the reading room is their focus. When we did the AAP that established the library service, the selling point was keeping the reading room in Pender open. That's what actually carried the AAP. So I got to thinking, what if the only library on the coast was Gibson's? How far would the furthest person from Half Moon Bay have to travel to get to that Gibson's library? Less than half an hour. The nearest person in Pender's a half hour. So it's tough, but I think the 5.4, in the absence of better statistics, is all I could justify and stand up in front of my people and say, I support this and I think it's fair. If I was to move to $46 per person for every resident of Pender Harbor, I would get lynched. That's about the best way I could describe it. The other thing I'd like to point out is that you should have a very close look at how Gibson's is funded. when you say you're paying $54 a person. That's not true. You're putting that amount of money in, but the business is paying it, not the individual person. So it's not an apples and apples to comparison here. I'm not sure all the businesses in Sechelt are kicking in their fair share to the library either. So it's a complicated issue, and I don't know the answer, but the best I can do is offer what I did. Thank you for listening.
So you're saying, based on the population, I'm looking at a ratio or something we can use here to go forward. So you're saying, based on the population, you would like to use 33% of the population served by the Sechelt Library as the basis for your funding. Is that correct? Okay. Half Moon Bay, Director Pratt. Director Pratt. Percentage population served.
Well, 100% of my population is served, so I'll stay at that.
Okay, and Roberts Creek, Director Ties.
Yeah, I guess I'll go with 50. I guess now we need to go with the funding.
Okay, so that's part of it, percentage. So then, do we need a dollar value as for the total, Tina? How are we going to? Yep. Okay. So what dollar value will you look at? Well, we've got 8. Sorry, go ahead.
I can figure it out though. So if you are.
Oh, no, I mean like of the total. Like what total? Because we were looking at 4.4% increase over last year.
Well, I think first determining if you're going to be funding the full ask, so the 828,
right? That's
720,
what we're getting at. Yep.
And or if it's an alternate amount, then I think we should decide on what is the total grant that the library is going to receive, and then we can apportion it. Yeah.
And that'll depend on what SIGD also comes back with.
Yeah, and I think that. Yes, we haven't heard about
anything from them. But we need the number today here? Yes.
Yeah, because we have to put those numbers in the various functions in order to be able to create the financial plan bylaw and subsequent requisitions.
Director Ties.
Well, the rate of inflation currently is 2.2%. So I might be okay with going somewhere around there. Director Pratt maybe suggested 2.5, so maybe we'll float the 2.5 idea.
Sorry? Okay. Director Lee? Did you have your hand up?
It was a question, and I got sidelined here thinking about the percentage increase as I was actually trying to figure out the difference between the two funding options that we got in the spreadsheet, but it's okay. I understand where we are now. I believe we actually at one point had talked about the 4.5 earlier, and I thought I had agreed to a 4.5 earlier, and
yeah,
I'm
I thought
good
you had to.
up to that. That's the best I can say.
Right.
I'd like to see what my other fellow directors have to say.
Tina?
In an effort to help you along. Because I know this is a challenge, and so I know that if there is part of you who want to fund only 2.5%, if one of the areas is willing to pay up to the 4.5%, maybe we can split it in the middle, and where, each area is going to pay an amount. It might mean that Area A is going to pay closer to 6% of the total, or 6.5%. It might mean that some of the other areas will shift, and we can decrease some of the other areas. I think still we have a wild card, which is the Sechelt Indian Government District, but if we put something reasonable forward and just, leave it up to them, then that would be the wild card. But this staff can show you what some of these are.
Okay, then the other piece that comes into play is, and I don't know if we want to do that now or if we want to leave that piece for later, is what are we going to do with regard to the 5-year MOU? Is that something we'll revisit then?
I think if the funders were satisfied with this funding apportionment, then the various staffs and councils would also have to give agreement to that. And then we would present another draft forward with that funding section as part of the agreement. And so if everybody was satisfied with that piece, so it's sort of an iterative process, unfortunately, because we have so many proverbial cooks in the kitchen, so that's the process.
And it will be an iterative process because I know that, we've already received a letter from District Sechelt Council around what we're looking for funding contributions from our other funders. So we'll see what happens when that goes back. So you'd like to do you have a thing you'd like to show us some numbers or, okay. We will part the way. Director Pratt.
District of Sechelt, have you had a chance to discuss this yet at your council table?
Which piece?
The percentage increase from year to year.
Yes, we have supported this amount.
The 4%?
The 4%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The 4.4 actually over last year, and then the 4% ongoing, yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask, I'm back stuck on population served. So the province says Area A is 2,624, 33%, and they fund on that basis. They
fund the Sechelt Library based on that basis,
okay.
Yes.
So if the regional district in one area says we only believe it is 33%, would the province say, well, if you're only funding at 33%, would you pull back on, would they reverse the funding for those other 2/3? Could they do that? If they say, local government, you're not funding 100%, we are, so we're going to do what you're doing. We're going to cut back our funding.
I don't believe so, but Director Lee?
No, what you're talking about is not something that's turned in as a report to the government. The percentage of funding, they just simply turn in a report of how much they got from the local government rather than from each area. That's all I could find on the web. But to answer your question, this funding was at that for the last 4 years. And the funding from the government was based on the total population. I don't see any reason why it would be changing. So if you look at the government's report on the web, it says they give this many dollars per head, and they use the total population to do that. And the SCRD sent a letter in asking them to go from served to total for that reason. Now, I assume it's for that reason. I don't know. It doesn't say in the letter where they asked. But I do know when they asked to go to the total population, the Area A funding was at the same 4.5% as the MOU. So, don't know if that asks your question, but that's history anyways.
I'm trying to understand the logic between the province saying your whole population is funded and we will give you the grant based on that, and Pender Harbor has come up with it, they're disagreeing with the province is saying. The province says you're totally funded, and Pender Harbor says we're not. So I can't square those in my mind. Like, how can, I guess that's within the discretion, right? Your Area A does not agree with what the province is saying.
Okay, I'm going to go to Director McMahon.
Okay.
Applying logic to what the province does is sort of a futile exercise. Are you asking, does the left hand know what the right hand is doing? No, they don't. They're not really paying attention. They grossly underfund our library system. And I think that we were merely attempting to get as many bucks out of them as we possibly could. And I'm perfectly happy with that. I don't think there's any danger that they are paying enough attention that they are going to withdraw funding. They're actually trying to get out of funding libraries altogether and have been for a number of years.
All right, let's look at some numbers.
So essentially, I understand that some of the logic presented thus far has been based on a population served, which essentially does then constitute a funding percentage. So this option here is increasing last year's base funding by 2.5%. So this is one of the options. Yesterday's option is based on the full funding allocation at 828,720. So you can play around with these as much as you like. I think one of the options I did down here is to say, look, like if Area A was comfortable with providing a certain funding allocation, then, is there any movement in some of that based on, okay, what if we did a 0.65% increase over the prior year? So it basically increases it a percentage. This one here would bring Area B to about 18%. This one here would bring Sechelt down to 62%. The Sechelt Indian Government District, just for iterative purposes, we've put 2.5%, so that's consistent with inflation. And then this would keep Area D at about 11%, which is very close to that 50% population served. And this is always the challenge with trying to keep both libraries equal because they're growing at different paces. And so we could always move these numbers. And I think this is how we, or we could go back and we could move to these 100%, et cetera. So this is 33%, 100% with a full ask from the Sechelt Library. So if there's any versions of these that the directors would like to visit, staff would be happy to do that. And this one here provides 100% of Area A, 100% of Area B, and 50% of Area D. Doesn't look like this helped at all.
Director Ties.
So if I get this correct, what you're saying is that ultimately, since these are all separate library services, I could say for Area D, I would like to contribute 50%, and I would like a 2.5% increase. And then we'll leave it up to everybody else to say whether Area A would want 4.4% and whether Area B would like 2.5 or whatever. Is that correct?
You could. Then what you're going to see is we're just going to have to add up as to what is it the library would be receiving in the end. That is a little bit of how we did it last year. And so there was a little bit of shortfall that they didn't receive a portion of what their ask was. So most certainly the funders can do that.
that will just require a little more work when we come to the MOU.
Well, I think that the decision then would have to be, okay, is this the base level that you're going to start with? And are you okay because they've then asked for 4% each year? And again, part of the question would be, okay, we're willing to give, 2.5 each year, not 4% each year. So that would be some of the questions that would need to be answered.
Okay, would you like to do it individually? I mean, it can still be one recommendation if we want, but individual inside of that. And are these numbers, Tina, I guess the question would be, if, for example, if he says he wants to do 2.5%, that's based on what? Based on what they gave last year? 2.5%? No. Right? I mean, I don't know, I don't know how we reconcile these numbers.
So if the Area D director, sorry, I'm going to blind you for a sec. So it would essentially be this number, this 87,784. The reason being is because the total value is 2.5% here times his 50% population. So we would start to work from here. So it would mean that,
So you're saying it's 2.5% on the base funding amount from last year is what you'd use as your base figure, and then based on that you would use that amount for Area D. But then Area A said he would consider 4.5. So how do you factor that piece in then?
Well, so this is where we would then we would take this amount here, and I would plug in this amount for him, because then it would satisfy his 5.46%, but he's going to pay up to this amount. So in essence, he would pay a little higher percentage, but essentially what we're saying is I'm comfortable with a certain dollar amount. So, are you comfortable with 45? Are you comfortable with 50?
Director Ties.
Okay, so one thing I'm curious about is if I go for the 2.5% at the 50% allotment, how much more am I paying compared to last year?
I have to open another spreadsheet.
You're doing 2.5%?
Yeah.
Okay, hang on. Sorry. Go ahead.
I would like to come back to per capita. The reason I want to come back to per capita is because without it's a surrogate for the service level. Right? There is no service level, going how many books circulate or how many logins and stuff, and it is still an absolutely valid metric across Canada and throughout the United States as a metric for the support on a per capita basis that an average library service in the United States, I think it was $55 per capita average in the United States for public libraries, which went up over previous years. So they're dinging the bell saying this is a good thing. Funding of public libraries has been going up in the United States. That's the kind of thing. So it is, unless you have better statistics, and library service or the library, it's column number 4 or 5, right? And then there's like another 150 to the right of that. So it's still the dominant metric for governments on how they fund this, whether that's in Ontario and Mississauga or throughout the United States. And it's very hard to quantify municipalities or public library funding and the service received because it's a social service. So without a better metric, that is still a good metric. And so the funding level here is $52.27 per capita based on 100% participation. So unless, in terms of Director Lee having better data, I still see that is the goal of what we're trying to do. unless we have another statistic. And no one is waving a better statistic, so that's the best one that I can even come up with. No one else is coming up with a simpler one. So that to me says where the Sunshine Coast as a whole is trying to go with servicing public libraries. And I'm going to speak for a whole about 1,000 properties on the islands who contribute to the district, to the Gibsons and District Public Library Association. Most of those people do not use the library, but it's an overhead for owning property there in that area as a social good. So that's kind of how I see it in terms of the goal is this per capita funding. How do you distribute it? And in Area F, there's a whole bunch of people who are resistant, but back in 1994, we all pooled together and said, this is what we want to do as a whole region. And GDPL keeps being put as a model. So I'm going, why wouldn't we want to try to do that model on the Upper Coast, where everybody's in? There's no one out. That's inclusive, and it's up to you how much you use the service. So I'm going, that's how I see the service level, is the per capita funding. So that's where I really struggle with this 33% population served. And I get the lynching that you might feel could happen, or the disruption in the population, because as an Area F director, library services is one of the things that the islands have reluctantly participated in, but very appreciatively supported, in terms of the whole region as a whole.
Director McMahon?
I will just say that there was a referendum, so people voted on it. And the situation in Area A is somewhat different. So it's not completely comparable, and there hasn't been this public debate. There's never been a bylaw.
There actually has been. It was an AAP that was done. So, but they had to do that, and it passed. Director Lee, and then we'll go to Tina.
There was some comments made that perhaps the per capita is how Gibson's is done. That is incorrect. The libraries are funded from a bunch of sources, and then you take the population and you divide it into the money raised, and then you get the per capita that way. It's not done by taking $1 per capita and allocating it direct. And Seashelt is the same way. They raise their own money internally. They get donations from people. All of these things go into making the library funding. And when you get the big package, then you divide the population into it and see your per capita. So you unfortunately are using the wrong definition of per capita. So I just wanted to point that out. I could tell you what percentage of your population is actually contributing.
Okay, so I'm going to cut off the conversation because we're going down a rabbit hole. We don't need to go there. Tina, Director Tighe asked a question. Do you have an answer for him?
Yes, in 2019, he provided $71,171. And so if this year funding 2.5% based on the 50% population, that would raise the contribution to $87,784. And that would be an increase of $16,613, approximately 23%.
You said $16,613?
Yes. And that's based on providing 2.5% over the prior year.
So, that's, I feel, more than generous of Area D. But for the sake of settling this argument, I'd be willing to go for that. So, that's kind of where I'm headed at this
Okay,
point.
so that's area D.
I'm
So
sorry,
you have
I
that?
was not listening carefully enough. Could I?
What he'd like to fund on is a 2.5% increase over 2019 amount, and using a 50% population served as the amount he'd like to use, which is comes out to $87,784. Area A, what would you like to do? Does Area B know what she'd like to do?
Oh, Area A?
Area
Sorry.
A, yes.
I was waiting for Lori to answer.
Yeah, no, Area A.
No,
Can I have two
for
areas
B.
now?
I thought she was going around.
No, she went to you first, alphabetically.
I'm still good at 4.5.
Okay, but 4.5% increase
That's what I think that
and
was.
33% population served. Okay. Do we have a dollar value for that? Do you need a dollar value in the? You need a dollar value in. Yes.
Could I ask something though, so to help me with my thinking?
Yeah.
If we took our three areas and said we all agreed to 4.4, we would have a value.
Yes.
Then whoever isn't putting the 4.4 will have a shortage. Could I see that figure?
To what end then? Would you see the others making that up? Like, would you make up the difference?
I just like to look at it.
Okay, so Tina, what he's asking is if you do a calculation, Laura, you're looking at 2.5%?
2.5 to 3%. I'm struggling with the 4.4 personally, just as a, it's just I know it's a number, but it feels like it's just ratcheting too high right now, even though it's incremental. But especially I'm looking at the multi-year, looking at all 5 years of the agreement, and 4% per year to me is it's a little bit too much. So I'm thinking sustainably 2.5 to 3% each year. So I'm happy to go on the higher side of 3%.
Okay, so if we looked at what Director Lee's question was then, if we looked at 4.5% on last year's amount, how much total would the three areas put in? Is that going to change depending on SIGD?
So what you're trying to do is say what their base amount was last year? Because essentially you're all going to come to the same conclusion. So
No, what he's saying is, what he'd like to know is if we assumed 4.5% on the amount total, and then if we say what area A, B, and D are looking to contribute of that amount, what's the shortfall? Because he's doing 4.5, she's doing 3, he's doing 2.5. What's the shortfall? And that. I can figure that out, yes. Yes, that's what he's asking. Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
But what I need to know, though, is Area D has already said they want to pay
Yes.
$87,784.
Yes.
Is Area B saying they want to pay 3%?
Yes. So what we're wanting to know is what is the difference between the 4.5%?
1 moment.
Yes.
Are we helping? Where is that figure?
So would you like to see this? And just make sure I understand what you guys mean. So area D is at 87,784. This here is taking the base amount from last year times 3% times the 100% served for area D, which makes 140,583. So is that what was intended? So for area A, it would be 45,264 because that is based on the 4.4% at the 33% served. So this would mean that the SCRD's portion of the funding would be 273,631.
Right, so that's based on the 2.5 and the 3 and the 4.5.
Correct.
Right. What is it? The question is, what is it based on 4.5? So you've got those numbers. Go back to the other spreadsheet with the 828,720.
Yep.
Add up the 3 columns for the 3 areas from that, and then let's look at the difference between the 2.
So between each area?
So we'd add up area D, 89,412, 142,494, 45,264. What's that total?
So you want to put it down here?
Sure.
45,260. Well, let me just copy this. I like the Jeopardy music. So, so essentially, this is. Yeah.
So we're looking at about $3,500, right? About $3,500 total?
Correct.
Okay, so Director Lee, you asked for that number. What would you like to do with that number?
So if Area A made the shortfall, that would make Area A's contribution 48,803.
You okay with that? Okay. So now I don't know how we put this into a recommendation.
I would bet that Tara has it.
I know. I hope Tara has it.
If she doesn't, I can help her out. No, I think right now I would just include the amount, because I think if you try to then translate it to whatever the Seashell Library is doing. Okay.
It's just, the 4.4 is the increase, it's just the apportionment inside of that that has changed.
So the one unknown about this number that we've got here, though, is the SIGD contribution. Is that correct? So right now that's at 50, so it could go up, it could go down.
Sorry, I was just trying to see what they contributed last year. It was somewhere, I think, in the neighborhood of 15 some odd thousand. So, you know, if this particular analysis said 17 or close to 18,
Last year was 15,430.
Yeah, I'm just saying that that's according to a 50% allotment to their population, right? So
it would make their portion go up to 17,481.
right. But we haven't had that discussion yet with SIGD, what percentage they would like to contribute with.
Right, because then we could have the conversation on 100% as well. 100% would take them to 34,238.
Yes, and I think some of the logic provided yesterday, I mean, those are discussions that could be had with the Sechelt Nation as far as, you know, the Indian government district portion is, I believe, only 44% of the leased properties, which is residential, based on the last assessment numbers, and then the rest are based on business and industry.
Okay, so what happens if we approve something here, and then we have the conversation with SIGD, and they change their percentage? Yeah, to 100. Do we come back and revisit this?
Well, I think from a timing perspective, this is sort of why regional districts tend to do their budgeting process first. And I think that part of the request that, look, the District of Sechelt, you know, they're looking for, you're paying a larger portion of it. So, you know, how this ends up to accomplish that, I think, is what we're trying to achieve. Now, we've made some headway here. So if the SIGD was willing to have that conversation, then I think from a timing perspective, how I would see it is set these. If the area directors are happy here at the SCRD, we create that as the base amount for the new agreement. If we want to find out what the amount that the nation is comfortable with, we set that amount, and then we're building on the agreement here. And essentially, the last piece would be the balancing piece, which would be between the nation and the District of Sechelt.
And really, we could set the funding for this year, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the basis for the agreement. I mean, really, we could say, you know, this is what was funded, but this is the basis we're going to use for the agreement going forward. We could do that if there was some change inside of what SIGD is doing or whatever.
That's
right?
That iterative piece.
Yes. So as long as we get the funding down for this year, we can work on that, knowing we're moving towards a 5-year agreement.
I think the methodology, I think, is the most important piece.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, Tara, do you have a recommendation for us?
Thank you, Chair. Recommended that the Sechelt Public Library 2020 budget request be approved and allocated for SCRD electoral area funders as follows. Electoral Area A, $48,803. Electoral Area B, $140,583. And Electoral Area D at $87,784.
Okay, are the electoral area directors okay with those numbers? Yes? Yes?
No.
All right, so we have that recommendation. Is there anything else you need at this point in our recommendation, Tina? Thank you. All right. So, who'd like to move that? Moved? Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, we have that. Library is done for now. Now, do you have a recommendation to move forward with drafting a 5-year MOU? And you've been working on that, so you don't need anything further from us on that at this point?
Well, I think working on that is strong. We're in a holding pattern until this step was done. So if there was any further resolution, it would be that the funding be forwarded to the Sechelt Nation and to the District of Sechelt Council. So maybe I lied.
Recommendation?
Yeah, it'd be forwarded.
I'll make that recommendation, that this information be forwarded to the Sechelt Indian Government District and the District of Sechelt. Seconder? Seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Anything further, Tina? All right. So I'd like to make get a recommendation that we move in camera under section 91A and K of the Community Charter. Someone like to make that recommendation? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you.